When you work the graveyard shift at a prison, you see some messed up stuff. And I'm not talking about the kind of stuff that you're thinking of right now. Inmates going after their bunkmates, screaming all through the night. None of that is unusual. That's the basic stuff. The kind of stuff that makes you get mad and shout. I'm talking about the kind of stuff that makes you go quiet. The stuff that when you see it or hear it, you go pale and your eyes go wide. Something happened recently that slots straight into this category. It's hard to even put it into words, honestly. To explain it to you, I've got to go to the very start of the story. I was doing my rounds on an otherwise normal night. One of the inmates named Phil had been shouting for a while, as he usually did, so me and my night watch partner Armin had to go in and beat him quiet. Phil had made a habit of shouting all day and all night about how he was innocent, and it was so annoying. Beating inmates was business as usual for us because there was no other way to reel them in when they got rowdy. You might think it harsh, but it's just the way that we do things. Anyway, apart from Phil being, Phil, it was a normal night. Until we got to Lee's cell. Didn't think much of it at first. Lee was a lifer in for killing 6 rival gang members in a shootout. He was sitting on the ground at the far end of his cell, with his back against the wall and his knees up against his chest. It wasn't unusual for inmates to stay up late, doing not much of anything, so my partner and I walked down by. It wasn't worth our time to force inmates to go to bed, least of all a stone-cold guy like Lee. After our patrol, we typically kicked back in the control room, watching the cameras for a couple of hours. Actually, to tell you the truth, neither of us really bothered to do what we were supposed to be doing in there. I mean, hell, there were like 20 of these cameras and there was never anything worth looking at on them. Just a series of long hallways, dimly lit and all grainy. I'm sitting in the control room right now as I type this and looking up. There's not a worthwhile thing to be seen. Anyway, after a couple of hours, we headed out on our second patrol. And when we got to Lee's cell, he was sitting the exact same, staring the exact same. "Lee," I called to him, "get to bed already." He didn't answer or move or anything. Even in the dark, the whites of his eyes were bright. And when I swung my flashlight on him, the glow shimmered off his arms and his forehead like he was sweating buckets. I looked up at his bunkmate. He was fast asleep, snoring soundly. I looked back at Lee. "Lee, I'm not gonna tell you again. Get to bed. Lee, answer me." Nothing. He was frozen like a statue, only this statue was shaking a little. And those eyes, gosh dang, they looked like they were about to pop out of his head. "A freak," my partner muttered. "Come on, ain't worth it." I nodded and went along, leaving Lee to his shenanigans, but it didn't sit right with me. The way that he was just sitting there and staring, I felt like he was staring right through me. As my partner and I got back into the control room, the lights and screens flickered a little. I didn't think anything of it. Our slammer was one of the older ones. We got back to scrolling our phones till the end of our shift. About Lee, you're probably thinking that he was just a loony like the rest of the inmates, and that loonies do crazy stuff all the time, right? You'd be right, usually. Basic stuff. But get this. That morning, right when I had gotten home after my shift, I got a call from work. First time they had ever called me at that hour. And then another first-time thing. The prison warden himself was on the line. "What the heck happened with Lee?" he said to me. He was acting a little odd," I told him. "But that's all, sir." "Lee is dead. Dawn Patrol found him with his throat torn out." My first thought was that his bunkmate did it to him. I mean, basic stuff, right? But apparently, his bunkmate woke up when Dawn Patrol went in there to investigate, and the bunkmate was so scared by what he saw that he literally pissed himself. And Dawn Patrol swore that it couldn't have been an act. Well, they pinned the murder on him anyway. The bunkmate got life on top of life. Basic stuff that. We don't do the whole court case thing in our prison. You know, where cops look everything over and witnesses take the stand and ultimately smart people decide who's guilty and who's not. Nah, usually we just pick whoever looks most suspect in a given situation, and the judge just slaps another life sentence on them, doubling or tripling the life sentence they first came in for. The next night I went by Lee's cell again on my patrol. They had cleaned the place up and his bunkmate was still in there. Kinda messed up honestly that they didn't even move him, but that's basic stuff. Things got even weirder then. Lee's bunkmate, his name was Walter, was awake and crying in the cell. I figured he was crying because of the new life sentence, which meant that he no longer had any chance of parole, seeing as he had killed his wife and mailed parts of her to her family out of spite. But that wasn't it. He stood up when I got to his cell and grabbed the bars so fast that I leapt back, hand on my baton. "You gotta do me in," he barked. What?" I stuttered. "Make it quick. Do me in, I'm begging." Armin, my partner, chuckled. "What's your deal, Walt?" "It's coming." Walter spat that out, literally. I had to wipe my face with the back of my hand. "It?" Armin drawled. "Got Lee. I'm next. Do me in, please. Quick and painless, please." Armin and I looked at each other. He was smirking, I was frowning. "Walt, nobody's coming after you," I told him. "Except maybe us." Walter began to cry again as he pressed his cheeks against the cold bars. "Please," he begged. "Oh, come on," Armin rumbled. I followed as he continued on down the hallway. Walter started moaning. "No, no, no." He thumped his head lightly against the bars as we walked off, rattling them. Armin scoffed, shaking his head. I looked at him. Any idea what that was about? I heard inmates whispering about it now and again. It's like a folktale for lifers. A folktale? A fairy tale, a spooky story, whatever you want to call it. And don't let it bother ya. I shrugged. I didn't know inmates had folktales. Thought they were too stupid to come up with anything like that. You're probably right. A visitor must have tried to spook one of them one time and it happened to take hold. We didn't talk for the rest of our rounds, and luckily Phil was actually quiet that night. All in all, it was an easy patrol. We got back to control, grabbed a coffee each and kicked back. As usual, neither of us bothered looking at the displays. The control room was a glorified break room and it almost made the other crap that we had to deal with in that job worth it. I was lost in some Twitter thread when the lights went out. And there was a loud zap and snap and they were off. The displays were on but crackling. Even my phone was flickering. "Come on," Armin shouted. By the look of his face against the glow of the screens, he wasn't mad. He was rattled. I had never seen Armin rattled before. "What's going on?" I asked. "Power outage." He was staring at the cams, eyes bouncing from one screen to the next. The lights were out in the halls too. The cameras were lit in a greenish hue as their night vision kicked in. Nah, no way. The cells are power locked. We have like 5 backup generators for that exact reason, and I don't see anyone busting out. Besides, the screens are still upright, so the lights are just whacked out. "Holy crap, Armin," I whispered. "What about the regular locks? The ones we have keys for?" "Oh, they're old as hell," Armin said. "Everybody knows it, including the inmates. Could kick through those things easily. It's the auto locks that keep them shut." One of the cams caught my eye. "Armin, look there." What the hell? We both stared in silence at the cam at the end of Walter's hallway. It caught his cell at an angle enough so that we could see him still standing there where we had left him. He was slamming his head against the bars. Not lightly like earlier. He was throwing his whole weight at them. I looked at Armin. "We should." "Oh God." I nearly fell off my chair at Armin shouting. I looked back at the cam. Walter's cell door had opened. Oh shit, the power was out, and he was stumbling over the space in front of his nook. We gotta lock the door to control. We got a radio for backup. I snatched the radio from the table beneath the cams, clicked the button, and... nothing. The radio was out. I tried my phone, but it was still whacked out. Look, Armin gasped. Walter was still outside his cell. He had grabbed the bars from the outside this time and was going at it again, ramming his head against them. There was black spreading across the bars and the floor at his feet. Blood, probably. And somehow that wasn't the weirdest part. The weirdest part was that the other inmates hadn't tried to break out. They hadn't even walked up to their bars, not one of them. These dudes would squeeze their faces against the bars anytime anything the least bit interesting happened. Yet now they were all tucked away. Armin and I were frozen, as though something bad would happen if one of us got up. I could have sworn that the air was colder than usual in control. For a moment, I even thought that I saw my own breath visible in front of me. I felt like I was in a bad dream. It all felt surreal and went against everything that I had experienced in that prison. Just then, I thought I saw something. At the end of the hall down from Walter's cell, it was like the light reaching the cam from that place was scratchy. For an instant, and I can't be sure because the night vision was blurry as hell, it looked as though Walter turned his head to the side, looking down the hall toward that distorted place. I opened my mouth to mention it to Armin, but then Walter wound up and threw himself at the bars hard. And didn't need HD to see that his neck snapped. He collapsed, his head dangling around his torso like a melon in a sack. I yelped, then I screamed because the lights came back on with a loud zap and snap. Radio should be back up. Let's call it in, Armin muttered. Call what in? He stammered. Power outage, broken out prisoner and, prisoner death. Psychotic break. I did as Armin asked. The radio was back up, everything was back to normal, and for what it was worth, nobody else had broken out. The doors were probably back up. We locked up in the control room as we waited for backup. No way that we were going to chance it out on the block until it was a sure thing that the cells were secure. We didn't speak much while we waited. A schizo, was all Armin said, mostly to himself. Not a label I like to use personally, but it was true that the inmates were often sick in the head. Walter had clearly been sick in the head. Finally, backup arrived. It took all of 5 minutes for the contracted mercs to confirm that these cells were secure. Apart from the mess that Walter had made, everything was in order. And dawn was coming round, and it was nearly time for me to head home when one of the inmates called me over. It was Mike, the lifer who had a thing for kids. I didn't want to talk to him honestly. I mean, he really liked young kids, but he insisted, and with the weirdness of that day, I figured that I would hear him out. I walked up, crossed my arms. What do you want? I didn't look at him. He was frazzled, more than what's usual for guys like him. You gotta talk to the warden. Shit, talk to the governor if you gotta. Tell them the prison ain't safe anymore, that the doors ain't working. Whatever you gotta tell him. Just get us transferred. I nearly laughed. Transferred? This isn't the kind of spot where you get to request transfers, Mike. Not just us inmates. Yourself too, believe me, we need to get out of here. And why is that? His mouth snapped shut. I glanced at him and saw something in his eyes that I had never seen before, and that's saying something, because you see all kinds of weird stuff in eyes like Mike's. He opened his mouth and spoke slowly. Our turn's come. Bad luck. It won't leave until it's had its fill. What are you on about? I asked. I didn't want to give Mike, of all people, the benefit of the doubt, yet my voice was a little uneven. He swallowed and then whispered, Stalker. I rolled my eyes. Without another word, I stepped away and made toward the exit, eager to be done for the day. Listen to me, Mike begged. It's for your good as much as mine." He kept going, getting louder as I got farther away. He shouted, giving his bars a kick that drew the attention of one of the morning guys. He got hushed up real quick as I left the block. As I drove home after that shift, I felt stupid because I couldn't stop thinking about what Mike had said. Walter had mentioned something similar as well before his incident. It was something Armin had heard of too, apparently. I resolved to ask my partner about it the next shift. He would laugh at me, but better than talking about it with that thing called Mike. I had a hard time sleeping that night, and when I finally did fall asleep, I had a nightmare. You would think this nightmare would be about throats torn out and heads smashed against the bars, right? But no, the nightmare was me in the hallway. It was an empty hallway of stone walls and cement flooring, dimly lit by those cold lights that we have at work. But it wasn't really empty. At the far end of the hallway, the space there was wrong. The air was wrong. Hell, I can't explain it. I told you at the start of the story, didn't I? It's hard to put into words. Just trying to type this is giving me chills and making me feel all cold. Anyway, I got to my next shift, said hey to Armin, and we got going on our rounds. You might think it unusual that we could just carry on at the prison despite the recent happenings. Thing is, from the point of view of the higher-ups, these incidents weren't that big of a deal. Death is business as usual in a prison like ours. You had to be there during these events to really grasp that what was happening was particularly messed up. During patrol, Armin acted as cool as ever. I couldn't tell you whether that was a front or not. I hoped it wasn't because of what I was about to say. Have you heard of a thing called the stalker? I asked him. He looked at me sidelong for a split second. Man, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. What was that supposed to mean? I kept quiet as we rounded a corner, dropping into Walter and Lee's hallway. Don't listen to that trash, Armin said. These guys are crazy, don't take them seriously. I'm not taking them seriously. I'm just curious, dude. Armin sighed. Alright then, I'll tell you. Relax. We walked past the cell that Lee and Walter had lived in for years. It was empty now, as you would expect, at least until they had fixed up the door. They had cleaned the place up, but you could still see faint brown stains along the bars and the floor. Armin continued. Like I said the other day, it's a kind of myth for these guys. They think the stalker is something that comes after people like them. I frowned. People like them. And people who have done terrible things. Huh, I shrugged. Fair, more power to the stalker. Armin grinned at me. That's what I'm saying. It makes our job easier, right? I chuckled, though I didn't really find it all that funny. We carried on in silence, our footsteps echoing off the walls and ringing across the block. The inmates were quieter than usual, and when we would walk past their cells, they would eye us warily. Even Phil was chill. That was the second shift in a row that he had been. His best streak yet in the 2 years that I had worked on that block. A while later, Armin and I were back in control, coffees and phones in hand. I was reminded of the early days on the job because for the first time in ages, I felt compelled to look at the displays. I tried to find something interesting to distract me on my phone, but my eyes kept drifting up at the cameras. I stole a glance at Armin and saw that he was the same, and like me, he was trying to keep it on the down low. I was feeling a little cold, so I told Armin that I was going to grab a hoodie from my locker. He nodded without a word. I stepped out of the control room and made for the end of the hallway where the lockers were. As I was slipping my hoodie over my head, I saw the glow of the locker room lights through the fabric, and for the briefest moment, I thought that I saw them flicker. I yanked my hoodie all the way on and looked around the room. Things seemed normal. I started back toward control, walking quicker than I had when I left. I nearly leapt right back out of my hoodie when a resounding zap and snap shook the hallway. The lights went out all at once and I was in pitch black. I fumbled for my phone, which was in my pocket. As I drew it out, I lost hold of it. It clattered and slid on the concrete floor. Shit, I said as I felt frantically along the ground. The cement flooring was so cold under my hands. I heard another snapping sound from the far end of the hall. I was still blind, my phone unrecovered. And then an orb of light appeared from where the sound had come. It seared my eyes against the otherwise pitch black. I gasped as the orb began to hover toward me. My phone. I needed my phone. I looked down at the now illuminated floor and saw where it had fallen to. I snatched it and held it up, swiping frantically, trying to get my light on. My flashlight came on just as the orb came within 5 feet of me. Armin? What the hell? I wasn't sure if that was you out here. Sorry. Who else would it have been? I growled. You could have said something instead of scaring the crap out of me. Armin gestured with his hand, depressing his palm downward. Quiet. The power's off again. He was right. The power was off and the inmates could break out again, same as the last shift. I shut my mouth and nodded. Armin helped me up. I dusted myself off, taking a few deep breaths, just trying to calm the hell down. I shouldn't have taken my time. The door opposite of control, the one that led to the block, flew open, slamming against the door stopper so hard that it crushed the thing entirely. That door was supposed to be locked, but we never bothered with it since it just made patrols more tedious. Another mistake. That because now Hector, one of the biggest and baddest of our inmates, was barreling down the hall straight for us. Oh shit, Armin roared. He snatched his baton from his hip. That was when I realized that I left mine in control and stood ready as Hector ran at us. I held up my phone, shining a light on the inmate. Ain't no way, Hector screamed as he thumped down the hallway. Ain't no way I'm staying in there. Armin leapt up to meet Hector, swinging his baton as hard as he could. The big guy didn't even seem to notice him. Maybe he was blinded by my flashlight, or maybe he just didn't have time for either of us. In any case, Armin's baton made clean and brutal contact with the side of Hector's head, sending the giant tumbling to the ground. He nearly fell on me. We thought that he was out cold, and we were wrong. As we approached, Hector swung at Armin with a punch that would have killed him if he hadn't ducked away, letting the fist glance off his head instead of crushing it. Do it, Hector shouted. Do it, or I'll do you in first. The giant was grabbing Armin now and slamming him against the wall. I had to act. I had to somehow neutralize him. I ran at Hector, leapt and kicked his head. I guess his skull was already fractured from the baton hit earlier, because when I laid him out against the wall, his head caved in entirely with a crunch that I'll never forget. A zap, a snap, and the lights came back on. I turned away, now wanting to look at what was left of Hector, but then I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, right next to the door that Hector had broken, was that same sort of wrongness. The air there wasn't right. The air was bent or twisted. For a moment, that twisted air started to take shape that vaguely resembled a man, but then it faded. The end of the hallway was normal aside from the fact that a prisoner had destroyed the door to the block. A prisoner who I had just killed. Shit. Armin cursed as he shoved Hector off himself. Oh shit. Oh god, no. I strained to listen, feeling lightheaded. Were any other inmates free of their cells? I couldn't hear a thing from the block. All was quiet. I stood and walked toward the busted door. Armin whispered from behind me, "Stop." I ignored him. Reaching the end of the hall, I turned and looked out at the block. Everything was quiet. Apart from Hector's cell door, which had blown off its hinges so fiercely that it fell down from the second story and onto the tables below, everything was normal. Not a single pair of eyes peeked past cell bars at me, despite the fact that every last one of those prisoners had heard the commotion. My memory of the remainder of that day is really fuzzy. I know that we called in the breakout and the downed inmate right away. Then we got cleaned up, then we got interviewed by the warden and then by the police. Then we went home because we weren't in any trouble or anything. We'd only defended ourselves. Basic stuff, right? Both of us were offered paid time off. I took the 2 weeks, but Armin being Armin, he turned down the offer. Said that he was fine and wanted to keep working until they let him. I used the 2 weeks to get my head right. I flipped my sleep schedule to what's considered normal, and then I saw some family, saw a ball game, saw an old friend, the works. The days were great. The nights weren't. I would toss and turn that image of Hector vivid in my mind. Eventually I would fall asleep, and every time I would dream of that cold hallway and that wrongness. And let me tell you, waking from nightmares in the dark of night was way worse than waking up in the daylight. By the time that I got back to work, I was relieved. Working through the night and snoozing during the day suited me just fine. I had a hop in my step as I got back to the clink. I had nearly forgotten all that nonsense about the stalker. The Hector thing was far from gone as you would expect, but I could push that aside well enough. Simon, the fellow who had filled in for me during those 2 weeks, briefed me during my shift, and he had some great news at long last. Those useless old locks had been replaced with new ones that no amount of strength could bust through. So now, even if the power went out, the inmates would stay in their cells. Thank God for that. But Simon also had bad news. During my 2 weeks off, 8 inmates had died. All suicide. They also told me that Armin hadn't been acting right. Honestly, that spooked me more than anything. Armin, of all people, tilted. I figured Simon was exaggerating and brushed it off. After the briefing and getting changed, I paced down the hallway to control, taking care not to look at the spots where Hector had laid. Stepping into the control room, I found Armin looking down at his baton. He smiled big when he saw me and gave me one of his bear hugs. I could tell that he was glad to have me back. "How are things?" I asked him as I sat in my chair. You know," Armin said without looking at me. "The schizos have been doing schizo things, the usual." I had more so meant to ask how things were outside of work, but I didn't press for that. "Yeah, I heard. 8 suicides, dang. We'll have a state-level investigation come down on us soon." "Ha," Armin chuckled. "Already in the works. Investigators will be here in a few weeks, but not state-level, even higher than that. A couple CIA agents will be coming down. Weird, huh?" My stomach fluttered a little. Yeah, weird for sure. I saw that vivid image of Hector's caved-in skull in my mind's eye. "You don't think we're in trouble, do you?" Armin raised his eyebrows. No way, don't sweat it. It's not us, it's the weirdos that are the problem." "Yeah, you're right, I agreed. Let's just keep doing our thing and let the bigwigs sort out the crazies." The first half of the shift went by pretty quick. On our first patrol, Phil was back to his hollering, so we hushed him up, though he gave us a mouthful and a half about how he was safe because he was innocent. A few of the other inmates asked for transfers, including that rat Mike, but Armin and I just ignored them. I tried joking with my partner a couple of times as we went, but he just smirked back. It was when we were pivoting to head back to control from the far end of the block that Armin froze. I didn't even notice at first. I walked a dozen or so paces before realizing he wasn't at my side. Spinning around, I saw him frozen mid-step. As though he were playing a game of red light, green light, and the light had just turned red. I gave an awkward smile. "Armin, you alright, bud?" He was staring to my side, eyes wide as hell. I looked to my side, saw nothing there at all. Frowning, I said, "Armin, hey, you're creeping me out, man." Suddenly, he shook himself and said, "One sec, I gotta hit the bathroom." I wanted to ask what his deal was all of a sudden, but he had turned and gone toward the bathroom before I could even open my mouth. Confused and a little annoyed, I went back to control on my own. When Armin got back and 5 minutes after me, he acted all normal. "Armin," I said to him, "we gotta talk about what happened out there." He shrugged. "Taco Bell." "Armin, cut it." He grinned at me. What do you want me to say? The Taco Bell from earlier wanted to come out all at once. It's a matter of life and death, you know. He patted his belly. I'm feeling all better now, though. Huh? I grunted. If you say so. We grabbed our coffees and our phones and settled in for the hour-long break before our next patrol. I glanced over at Armin while I kicked back and saw him staring at his baton more often than not. His eyes also darted over my shoulder a few times at the control room door. It was one of those doors that had a glass window built into the top half of it. Him staring at it creeped me out, but I didn't want to look over my shoulder and make it a whole thing, you know. It was nearly time for our next patrol when I came across a video that I thought was hilarious. Oh man, Armin, check this. Armin stood up so fast that his chair rolled back and clattered against the back wall. At the exact same time, the lights flickered. Armin, what the hell? Gotta get something for my car, be back in a sec. What? Armin! He burst out of the room, running down the hall toward the front of the prison. I was stunned for a moment, thinking to myself about how right Simon had been about Armin. And then I got up and turned around to go to the parking lot and see. I tripped over myself and fell backward when I saw who or what rather was standing behind the door's glass window. My breath rose in a visible plume in front of me as I stared. A corpse stood there, all blurry and scratchy, or at least I thought that I had seen a corpse for a moment, but I blinked and then there was nothing at all. Distant visions of a cracked open head and a bloodied body echoed in my mind. But otherwise, the only thing I saw through the window was the stone wall beyond. Holy shit, was I losing it too? Brushing my tangled, wriggling thoughts aside, I went out and after Armin. I dashed out to the parking lot and looking at his go-to parking spot, I saw that he was gone. I looked around the rest of the lot, knowing that it was futile because Armin was a creature of habit and he always parked in his usual spot. His car wasn't there. He was gone. Bewildered, I went back inside. It was bad enough that I left the block unattended for those few minutes. I needed to get back in there and close out my shift. I told myself that Armin's Taco Bell predicament had hit him again, hard enough this time that he needed to see a doctor. He was the type to be embarrassed over stuff like that and too proud to talk about it, so he ran off without a word. It was the next evening, not long before my shift, that the warden himself called me to tell me that Armin had quit. I didn't believe him at first, but when the warden started getting pissed at me for questioning it, I realized he wasn't kidding around. Armin had quit, no notice or anything. My partner of 2 years and my good friend left without a word. I texted him right away and even tried calling him, but he had ghosted me. I went into work that night because what else was I going to do? Simon filled in for Armin and I wondered if he was going to become my new full-time partner. He was friendly, I had to admit, but he wasn't nearly as easygoing as Armin had been. Simon and I were on our first patrol when it happened to me again. We were strolling down the block when, for a fraction of a second, I saw a dude peeking up from around a corner, from a spot where there shouldn't have been anyone. It was the faintest thing at the edge of my vision, but I could have sworn there was a big guy standing there, one eye and shoulder poking out from behind the wall. "You alright?" Simon had asked with a frown. I shook myself. "Oh good, I have a headache, that's all, let's keep going." I started to worry that I was actually losing it. A lot of messed up stuff had happened on our block recently and my mental was all rattled. Maybe I needed to take another break. Paid time off, be damned. A couple weeks or maybe even a month. Maybe I needed to go on a proper vacation to hit the beaches and really unwind. I was thinking about that in the control room when I happened to glance up at the cams to see that corpse once more. It was gone after I had blinked, but this big dude had filled every display like he was right up by the cameras. And the after image in my mind was more vivid somehow. The eyes were blank and glowing. The mouth was drooping and half open. The one side of the skull was caved in. Ropes of brain dangling out over the face. It was nauseating even through the grainy display. I looked over at Simon and saw him chuckling at something that he was watching on his phone, unperturbed. I decided that I really was losing it right then, and after my shift, I put in a request to get some time off. The warden was pissed because Armin had just ditched too, but I was upfront about my mental being in bad shape, so he gave in and told me that he would let me off in a few weeks once he had found someone to cover for me. And that brings us to the present day. I'm still waiting for my vacation, but hanging in there. Simon's been a godsend. He really looks out for me. Even now he's gone out to get us coffees, and like good coffees, not the crap we make here in Control. I've been having my hallucination more than I would care to admit. It's that same guy peeking at me from the edge of my vision and from around corners. The part of my mind that isn't rational tells me that it's Hector haunting me. The sensible part tells me that I need a break from all this. Anyway, I thought sharing all of this with you people on the internet might help me unwind a bit while I wait for my time off. It's crazy working in a place like this and definitely not something that I would recommend. Dang, my fingers are getting stiff. It's too cold in here. I should probably post this and hop off till I get my coffee and warm up. Huh, and now the lights are flickering. Let me guess, next to zap and to snap and lights go out. Huh, right. A few years back, I had the worst streak of bad luck in my entire life. My dad, my one living parent, got run over at a pedestrian crossing. My fiance left me. I lost my job at the warehouse and I had to move to the outskirts of town because of a sudden rent spike. My one stroke of good luck was my friend Gareth. He mainly worked the commissary at a nearby prison, and he told me that they were looking for more people. Mainly night crew, but the pay was solid. There was a trial period and 2 weeks of on-the-job learning, but it was all paid for. In my position, how could I say no? And so I started my job as a corrections officer just outside of Tomscog, Minnesota. The place was partly owned by a private company, but it was basically the same logo you would see all over town. Hatchet Pharma has a finger in everything around here. I got the uniform, I met the inmates. I went through the routine and I got to know who to keep my eyes on. I had to fire my taser after 3 weeks on the job, but that was pretty much the highlight. Most of the time it was just sitting around and waiting for something to happen, or breaking up loud conversations. It's not as dramatic as it sounds, but you gotta be ready for when it counts. In December of 2021, I was assigned to a new route. One of the people working with inmates in solitary confinement had to quit over a health scare, and I was next in line to take his place. It was still a night gig, but in a deeply disturbing part of the jail. No, I won't paint it to be something that it's not. Isolation is just a whole bunch of people keeping to themselves, usually not even that many. Sure, the Tomscog facility has a slightly higher solitary capacity than normal, but we're talking 10 to 20% at most. But still, you need someone there at all times. You never know what they can come up with, and they're trickier than they look. There was this one guy at the end of the hall that just gave me the creeps. The other guards called him Mary, short for a longer biblical name that I could never remember. He always broke the lights in his cell, and he was rumored to be extremely violent. Even in solitary confinement, he had to wear shackles. Every time he received his food, he had to put his hands out to have the shackles removed so that he could eat. That's basically the only part of him that I ever saw. His hands. The cell was always pitch black. The guy used to be an academic. Mary had 3 doctorates, but one day he just snapped. Killed 3 of his students. He also had some kind of chemical burn on his arms, leaving most of the skin on his hands discolored. Silver poisoning, possibly. Even his files were strange, stamped with a sort of blue flower. Most inmates had a stamp on their file, but he was the only one with the sunflower. The guy refused to eat during the day, so I was the one to feed him on the night shift. Every time I removed those shackles, I would see those gnarled blue hands reach for me, or the tray, whichever. One of those nights we were having beef stew. Nothing fancy to look at, but the thing smelled divine. I brought him some bread on the side, a little Jell-O box, and a bottle of water. Everyone else was fast asleep, apart from a newbie who couldn't stop crying at the end of the corridor. "Same procedure as last time," I said, hands up front. Those elongated fingers slowly slid out as if giving me an invisible fruit. The shackles clattered. I put down the tray, got the keys, and started twisting the locks back and forth. These were always a pain to deal with. "You're going to let me out," Mary said. "I need you to, so you're going to." "Yeah, I don't see that happening, buddy." I unlocked his shackles and fetched his tray. He took it, but lingered for a second. "You're going to," he said with no hint of a joke. "It's already decided." "Well, nobody showed me that memo," I chuckled. "You get in there." "Someone said bad things happened to you," Mary said, "and that's why you're here." "Well, that makes two of us. Have a nice dinner." I walked away but couldn't help but to look back at those long fingers as they slid back inside the dark room. It gave me the creeps every time. And sure, I had to get the tray and cuff him back up in a bit, but that was just part of the job. The next night was fish sticks, not too shabby but far from fresh. There were only 3 people in solitary that night. 2 guys who tried to kill each other, and Mary. Always Mary. As soon as I approached, those blue hands slid back out. I had to look away. There was something about the texture of his hands that made me feel weird, like they were always a bit too slick, like a thin cover of soap. This time he didn't skip a beat. "You're going to let me out. It's already decided." He keeps saying it, but this door seems just as sturdy today as it did yesterday. "If you come in, you'll see why you're going to let me out." "You mean if I open this door without any kind of backup or supervision? Yeah, I got a pretty good idea why you would get out if I did." "That's not it." I unlocked his shackles and he took his tray. It disappeared into the darkness, but Mary kept talking. "You being here is proof that I made it," he said. "That I'll get out." "I'm not following." "They told me you lost a lot of things. Your dad, your girl, your apartment." There was poison in his words. Deep, seething poison. I'll be honest, I wanted to break his hands when he said it. But what bothered me more was where he had heard it from. There was no one around to talk to him. And as a rule, we didn't talk to inmates about our personal lives. Neither our own or any of the other employees. Someone must have slipped up. "Look, that's personal," I said, "and that's none of your business." "Then how do I know that your dad got hit by a white Corolla?" I banged on the door. I didn't even know why. It was just this instinctual reaction to shut him up. But of course, that just made him laugh. How the hell did he know? It had been a hit and run and the color of the car was only a footnote in the police report. "That's not funny," I spat. "And you're not making any new friends by doing this." "I don't care, little man," he continued, "because you're going to let me out. Not in my life." I took the tray back from him before he had finished his dinner and I shackled him right back up. He didn't resist. It shut him up for a while, but it was a faint victory. I asked to be transferred to another shift, but there just wasn't any other people available. Hiring was rough and we were basically on our own. If we lost one person to sickness, we would be out of luck at that point. So no, there was no option to switch. It couldn't be done. I didn't want to go back to Mary. I really didn't. I didn't know who was talking to him and I didn't like what he was saying. I had checked and double-checked and there was no mistaking that white Corolla. It had gone 60 on a 30-mile-per-hour street and killed him on impact, before disappearing down a dirt road. The thing was just gone. The police said that it might have been deliberate, that it was too fast to be an accident. and in my mind's eye I could see blue hands on the steering wheel. When I walked up to Mary's cell with a tray of meatballs and mashed potatoes, I was genuinely scared of what he might say. Every word felt like a threat. Could he really say something to make me let him out? What if he could? What would it be? "Hands out," I said, knocking on his door. "You're not letting me out tonight," he sighed. "I know that, but it's gonna happen." Yeah, I shrugged. "That's all I want to do." "Did they tell you what I did? How I did it?" "Oh, I got a pretty good picture." "Helium poisoning, painless asphyxiation. They didn't feel a thing." I didn't respond. I just took off his shackles and I gave him the tray. "I'm not a monster, you know. I just do what I have to do." "Eat up and leave the tray," I said as I walked off. "Maybe ask your ex about Beverly," he shouted through the slit in the door. I could almost see his lips moving. "I'm sure you'll find it an illuminating conversation." I didn't want to do it, I didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't want to think about it. But there was something there. In the last fight that we had had, she had shouted that name, Beverly. I didn't know a Beverly, and at that moment I didn't care. But it was such a specific name. The chance that Mary just picked it up on random was improbable. So the next day before my shift, I decided to give my ex a call. Things had calmed down after all. There was a cold greeting and even colder small talk. Finally, she just called me out. "Just tell me what you want," she asked. "I want to talk about Beverly," I said. "You said her name once." "What? You're getting remarried? You want to bury the hatchet?" No, what? You want me to forgive you, give you my blessing. What are you talking about?" There was a moment of silence and she scoffed. "That skank you're dating." "I'm not dating a Beverly," I said. "I never have." "Don't give me that. I saw your emails, her videos, her Insta." "Look, I don't know any Beverly." She screamed her username and cut the call. I got online and I looked her up. Beverly was maybe 8 years younger than me and absolutely stunning. She had only been active for a few months where she would upload a sort of daily video blog. It was heartbreaking. In every post, she talked about the issues of being the other woman. A vlog kind of thing, daily outfit posts, memes, a sort of strange mix. This was the woman she thought that I had been involved with, through some kind of email. It didn't make sense. And how the hell did Mary know about this? This haunted me. I didn't know what to think and I felt myself coming back to Mary and his blue hands. I had this constant sense of him being with me, looking at me. It felt like I was missing something. I could feel that strange, slick texture as the hands wrapped around my neck whenever I let my mind wander. I could feel his presence in the back seat of my car, riding along with me. And once at a stop sign, I heard him clear his day right behind me. "You're gonna let me out." But there was no one there. The next time I went back, I skipped the tray. We were gonna figure this out. I finished my coffee and I thundered down the hall, ignoring the other inmates. Mary had some explaining to do, and I was terrified of what he was gonna say, but I needed to hear it. "You're gonna tell me what you know right now. I've had my black coffee and I'll break your hands." "Oh, you let me out and it'll all be clear," chuckled Mary. "I promise, it's kind of written on the wall at this point." I smacked my nightstick against the door. "No more games." "Well then come in and teach me a lesson. Open the door." I calmed down. Maybe this was how he got to me, tricking me. That wasn't gonna work, no way. "Your shift starts at 10:15, Mary said. You take your coffee black and you came here the first thing you did. Hold on. He shuffled off into the back of the cell. There was a strange scratching sound and he was gone for a solid minute. I just listened, trying to figure him out. I shone a flashlight inside, but he had hung up a sheet over the slit in the door. I couldn't see anything without going inside. So, there was your dad, you reacted to that. Then a Beverly, that worked. What made you lose your last job? Was it, let's say a failed drug test? Yeah, that'll work. What are you talking about? And you don't do drugs, probably some kind of error. Maybe a few poppy seed pastries for breakfast. Those things can give a false positive. I just stood there, mouth wide open. The morning of the mandatory drug test, I had 3 pastries with poppy seeds. The bakery down the street were giving them away as a promotional event. I got this awful pit in my stomach, like he knew more about me than I did. Like he was about to tell me something horrible. Like he was standing right behind me, just soaking up my fear. So, that brought you here. I'll have to figure that out later. Maybe you know someone here, he continued. Shut up, I said, hitting the door. I'm telling you to shut up. I looked over my shoulder. There was no one else here. Why was I feeling watched? Oh, calm down, Mary said. We're getting to the end. You're about to let me out. Never, I spat. You're gonna rot in there. Oh, don't you understand? He yelled back. The fact that you're here proves that I'm right. How? That doesn't make any sense. And he told me everything. Mary, or Meridian, was given an opportunity. If he followed a very specific set of events, he would be given a great gift. Non-locality, he said, but you need to disassociate hard enough. Basically, turn yourself crazy enough for reality not to make sense anymore. Or rather, for you as a person not to make sense to reality. The other way around. As part of this delusion, he had killed 3 of his students. He had burned himself with chemicals. And then seemingly as part of his plan, he willingly went to jail. Years of darkness, isolation, like being in a sensory deprivation tank. I need it, I crave it, and then I'm done. And all for what? To be unbound, no causality, no rules, non-linearity. And the fact that you're standing here is all the proof that I need to know that it's going to work. And why is that? Don't you get it? A blue hand slipped out of the slit in the door and pointed at me. I did this to you. I put you here. Someday you will let me out, because if you didn't, I wouldn't get you to come here. And that time is drawing close. I don't need this darkness anymore. I feel it. I'm done. That's impossible, I said. That's literally impossible. Then why are you sliding down the wall, feeling sleepy? I hadn't even noticed. I was nodding off right there in the hall. I tried touching my face to see if I could feel anything. Did you? Yes, Mary said. I drugged you. I couldn't have if you hadn't told me about the black coffee, but now that you did, I could. It's on the list. It's all on the list, and what's on the list is going to happen. I don't understand. Imagine you could travel through time, he chuckled. Not today, but someday. And you promise yourself that you're gonna put a rose outside your door on this very day, in this very present. And when you open your door, the rose is there. Then you would know that you're gonna get that power. You know that you will come here someday. And then it all comes down to strength of will, to force yourself to remember all that you're going to do, and in the correct order. That's not, An image flashed in my head. Blue hands on the steering wheel of the white Corolla. a man paying the bakery to promote some pastries, a woman being paid for a bit of internet theater by an unknown benefactor. There were dozens of people standing at the end of the hallway. Thin, emaciated men with long fingers and blue hands. I blacked out. I woke up in the staff room with a nurse looking into my eyes. They gave me a checkup and they sent me home to rest up. They gave me a few days off just to make sure. I didn't know what to say. I had my keys and Mary was still in his cell. If I was the one to let him out, all I had to do to make sure that didn't happen was to stay away. That would ruin his plans, so taking a few days off seemed perfectly fine. As I was about to leave, Gareth met me in the parking lot. He jogged out to say goodnight and to see if I was okay. "Look," he said, "I know you hate that shift, but don't worry about it. They're moving him and I've heard talks of approving a shift change. It'll be somebody else's problem, and you'll be back in cell block D." "What? What do you mean?" "They heard how much he was messing with you," Gareth said, "and decided that it just wasn't worth it. They're moving him, we can't lose you." "What? Why?" I thought this would be good news to you." "No, I don't know, I don't know." Gareth patted my shoulder and sent me on my way. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain it? Did I even believe it? I got in my car and took a deep breath. A strange chemical smell. I noticed something on the passenger seat. A letter. I took a deep breath and opened it. "Thanks for the help," it said. "This one's on me." A little smiley face and $100 bill. I just stared at it. Suddenly there was a loud bang. For a heartbeat, all I could see were blue hands simultaneously smacking my car. I shot out of the driver's seat, but there was no one outside, just an empty parking lot. Still, I couldn't help but feel watched. My pulse pounded behind my eyes, almost popping a blood vessel. They were out there. He was out there, watching me from the dark. He was still getting out. I knew that he was all around me, unbound. He could stab me, push me over, whatever. He'd be here and then not, and I would be helpless. I got this intense sense of paranoia washing over me, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I just dug my fingertips into my hair, trying to force my mind out of that dark pit. This was my doing. I'd let him treat me like crap, and because of it, they were going to move him. During that move, he would get out. He must have planned it, and I couldn't do anything about it since I was off duty. I took another look at that $100 bill, and a thought occurred to me. There was something I could do. I went to the gas station. I came back the next day with a backpack. I showed my credentials and told the gatekeep that I was there to fetch something from my locker. It was fine, Danny knows me. I got in on the day shift and I waved at the others. A few of them had asked how I was doing, what I was doing, the regular chit-chat. All smiles and waves. Prison transfers take place in the early afternoon. It'll only be a short walk, but that might be all he needed to escape. I used my keys to get past cell block D. I knew that I would get stuck on camera, but I also knew that the prisoners were out in the yard. Nobody was watching the tapes, not this close to lunch. I walked straight into the solitary ward, and all the way up to Mary's door. "Wait," he said. You're here." "Yeah." "No, that doesn't make any sense." "Send me home then. Have somebody shoot me, I'm waiting." "No, wait, that doesn't. Hold on." There was a shuffle as Mary hurried into the back of his cell. I couldn't feel them here. We were alone. I unzipped my backpack and took out a door stopper. I shoved it under the door. That thing wasn't moving anytime soon. I stepped over to the fire alarm and pulled the handle. The emergency doors opened with a violent and blaring siren. Every door swung open except for Mary's. I was lucky that time. No one in the solitary ward but Mary and I. Hold on, what are you doing? I took out one more thing from my backpack, a can of gasoline. I shoved it through the slit in the door, tearing down the sheet that he had hung up. Oh, you're killing me, that's what this is. Yeah, and I see no little blue hands trying to stop me, so I guess it's working. Oh, maybe you're missing the point. Maybe you're not doing what you're supposed to. And how exactly is that a bad thing if it keeps you from getting out? Half a can was enough, it was leaking under the door. I took out a gasoline-soaked rag, lit it on fire, and I tossed it through the slit. For a split second, the room lit up. The walls, the bed, even Mary. I got a short view of the room as it was and what he was doing in there. He had drawn things on the walls and the floor. A white Corolla, Beverly, poppy seeds, black coffee. The wall was full of things. Arrows, lines, and squares, all related to me. These were all the things that he was gonna do when he got out. And he was so convinced that I was the one to let him out. So convinced that it had all started to happen. And then there was Mary himself. He was more bone than man. Sunken eyes like he hadn't slept for weeks. He had torn his hair out and bit off his fingernails. This was a completely senseless man, and he stared at me with unblinking eyes. But in that moment, as the flames started to lick him and the fire spread into the hallway, he looked me in the eyes and smiled. I just bolted out of there. Hundreds of inmates were gathering in the yard and I could already hear sirens. I could see flames bursting out of the solitary ward. Before the firefighters could get there, one of the walls completely collapsed. And I saw him, just for a brief second. I saw that emaciated man standing in the flames, holding his hands out like he was receiving a gift. The chemicals in his arms ignited with a bright green. They had burned straight through the wall. And the thought hit me. Technically, he was out. He might be on fire, but he was out. And in that split second, in that heartbeat, he vanished, like snuffing out a candle. Hours later, the fire was put out. It didn't spread. Turns out that part of the jail had a peculiar type of stone that was weak to high temperatures. The stonework just crumbled. Some kind of exposure to a certain chemical. A blue one with a green flame. The construction crew had cheaped out on materials many years ago. There were no recordings. They had forgotten to change the tapes from last night. There were no visitors' logs. Barely anyone remembered me even being there. And lastly, there was no body recovered in that cell. As I got back in my car, I just held my breath, waiting for something to happen. A knife at my throat. Possibilities passed through my mind. In another place, it all really happened. Violent images of myself getting stabbed, burned, tortured, and flayed. A world where everything had turned to ash, and I was placed in front of a throne of bone as a prize gesture. Dark figures rising from the earth, tearing the world apart, breaking the ground like an eggshell. I cried. It was seconds away at most. But minutes passed. I found a letter on the passenger seat. It hadn't been there seconds ago. It took me a solid 15 minutes to work up the courage to open it. "You got me out," it said with a smiley face. And there was another $100 bill. I've been in and out of prisons and jails ever since I was 17. I thought that I had seen it all. Brotherhood members attacking guards, wars, escapes, and attack. I saw many things that still give me nightmares to this day. McDonald, 402202, the guard barked out. I jumped up, the thin mattress under me exhaling a whiff of stale air. I looked through the bars, seeing Correctional Officer Shea. Shea was a morbidly obese man with a penchant for being loud and lazy. I had seen a member of the Bloods punch him straight in the nose before, a scene that I still remembered with some humor. Shea had crumpled like wet paper on the floor, screaming and crying as more COs ran over and tackled the inmate. "Yeah?" I asked. Shea handed me a sheet of paper. He regarded me with his gray, colorless eyes. "Congratulations, you're being transferred. Pack up your stuff. This is your last day at Springfield Correctional Center." Now you might think that I would be happy to get a transfer. The Springfield Correctional Center was after all a dump. The food was terrible and always cold, and the place always smelled like bleach and chemicals. And at night it got so cold with only my flimsy sheet that I often woke up shivering. The building was nearly a century old, and the fact that it was still functional at all was a miracle in itself. But to be honest, I wasn't thrilled about the transfer. I had made friends here and knew the lay of the land. I didn't have to worry about getting jumped or attacked in the showers. As the old adage goes, it's better the devil you know than the one that you don't. I was let out of my cell the next evening with all the worldly possessions that I owned, which fit neatly into a clear trash bag with room to spare. I owned some prison clothes, a toothpaste, a toothbrush, deodorant, a Bible, a pair of sandals, and a radio. I felt the unbearable lightness of my existence reflected in that bag as it smacked rhythmically against my leg. "Good luck, friend Josh," a rather insane acquaintance of mine named Alvin called out from his cell as I passed down the bleak, concrete hallway. "Take care, man. I hope we meet again on the outside," I said, waving, knowing that I would almost certainly never see any of these people again. Heck, I hadn't even seen my family in over 5 years. None of them came to visit me anymore. No one wrote me letters or put money in my commissary account or sent me books to read. Well, we're all born alone and we all die alone, I thought to myself as Shea walked by my side. He was breathing heavily as if he had just finished running a marathon. I looked over at his face, seeing the burst capillaries on his nose from years of hard drinking and the squint of his little piggy eyes. There was a slight gleam of intelligence and slyness behind that ugly mug, though. "Well, amigo," Shea said in his slow and plodding way, "I got a sign to go with you. I'll be your ride-along buddy. You excited or what?" I smiled faintly at him. "There are worse people than you here, Shea," I said. "Far worse." I got on the prison bus in my bright orange jumpsuit. To my surprise, I saw the back was nearly empty. There was only one other prisoner in the back. Shea sat with us to monitor us, and we were also handcuffed and ankle-cuffed. A chain ran down and connected the two. I looked over at the other prisoner, a black guy with a shaved head. I think he also shaved his eyebrows. I mean, I literally didn't see a single hair on his head besides eyelashes, which he apparently hadn't found a way to shave yet. "Sup," he said, and I nodded. "Sup." We sat there in awkward silence as Shea plopped down hard on the bench between us. It groaned like a confused old man. "So, what do you know about this place, Shea?" I asked. He sucked down half a bottle of Coke and then heaved a deep sigh. "I don't know much about it, to be frank," he admitted sheepishly. "It's apparently brand new, though. They asked us to send a couple people who met certain criteria." "What does that mean?" the black guy asked. Shea gave him a serious look. "Oh, come on, Timmy, you know what I mean. Hardened criminals. People with long records who tour prisons like some people tour French beaches." I scoffed. "There are far worse people than me in prison," I said. "Well, they asked for no murderers or people affiliated with gangs, and I don't know why, but maybe it's some new government program. They apparently call it an experimental prison." "What about me?" Timmy asked. Shay apparently knew what he meant. "You're not a murderer, Timmy," she said, his lips forming the faintest twitch of a smile. "You never." "Well, there was that time my girlfriend got me to drop some acid with her. She went and killed her parents and then we hit the road," Timmy said fondly, his eyes rising as if he were looking at a hovering angel in the far-off distance. "You were never convicted of any accessory charges, so doesn't count," Shay retorted. "Oh, it counts," Timmy drawled in a slow, plodding way. "It counts. Everything in life counts. If I've learned anything in the last 36 years, it's that you can never truly escape anything that you've done, good or bad." I couldn't see much from the prison van. There is a small, shatterproof window in these swinging back doors, but it only gave a fleeting view of what was behind us. I noticed the dark forest stretching out to the horizon over rolling hills. We drove for a few hours. The three of us talked about everything from sports to politics to the recent spate of fatal stabbings at SCC. I felt the van stop. I looked out the back window, seeing more endless trees. I didn't see a single house or car on the road that we had taken. "This place is a ghost town," I said. Shay nodded. "Yeah, it's dead as Frank Sinatra around here," Shay said, wheezing out a high-pitched laugh at his own joke. "This area used to be big for coal mining, but as it dried up and people lost their jobs, they moved away. You know, my grandfather was a coal miner." "Good place to build a prison, huh?" Timmy asked. "If there's no one around." We were cut off by a clanging alarm up ahead. I heard something large moving, probably the gate opening, and then we were inside. I saw the guard towers and rolls of razor wire for a brief moment as the van pulled into an open garage. The darkness immediately blanketed us. The garage door slowly rolled shut behind us. Shay jumped up. "Let's get you boys inside so you can take off your handcuffs and everything," he said, motioning for us to follow. He pulled out a flashlight from his belt, guiding us through the pitch black. The dim light sent shadows racing across the room like groping tentacles. I caught glimpses of strange objects in the darkness. They looked like medieval torture devices. "What is this place?" I whispered. My voice echoed far too loudly off the cold concrete floor and walls. "Yeah, those look like torture devices on that table, Shay. I think those things are thumb screws that might be a pair of anguish." I pointed to the pear-shaped object with 3 wicked blades whose points came together sitting on a dusty shelf. The ornate handle had springs connected to it. The object could be forced into any human orifice, and when the springs were engaged, it would open like a flower inside the person's body, ripping them apart and enlarging that orifice into a hole. "How do you know so much about this?" Shay asked, giving me a strange look. He narrowed his little piggy eyes. He continued to fumble with the flashlight, peering around for a door to exit the garage. I looked back at the car and saw the driver just sitting there, his entire body as lifeless and still as a mannequin. "I've read a few books," I said as Timmy interrupted us. "I see little red lights glowing under that door," Timmy said. Shay focused his flashlight on the spot. Across the room, I noticed what Timmy was pointing at. It was an ancient-looking black door. The wood had started to crack and splinter down the middle. Engraved in silver on the front, it said, "Entrance to North Frost Penitentiary." "Hello," Shay called toward the door as the 3 of us moved forward, the steel chains giving my steps a clinking rhythm. Shay reached the antique crystal doorknob. Timmy and I stood next to a dust-covered and brazen bull, its bronze mouth wide open as if it was silently roaring at us. As Shay pulled open the door, crimson light flooded into the garage. Tinted black glass covered the back wall. A speaker button sat next to the window. I looked to my right, seeing a massive sign sprawled across the wall there. It read, "Rules for Personal Conduct at North Frost. 1. The COs without faces don't work here and we don't know who they are. If you see one, press one of the buttons labeled Emergency Dispatch that are scattered around the complex. 2. When the red emergency lights come on, hide until they shut off. 3. Do not go into the medical ward for any reason. 4. The warden roams the prison every night at 3:33 a.m. looking for human meat. Don't let him catch you. What is this, a joke? Timmy asked, his face forming into a scowl. Well. Shay rubbed the back of his neck, looking like a little obese boy who had lost his parents. I've never been here before, but this is all pretty unusual, I have to admit. A buzzing came from the back of the room, and suddenly, a garish, echoing intercom turned on. Please remove their chains and direct them through the door on the left, a female robotic voice said, calmly in a tone as cool as lemonade on a hot day. Your transfer will then be complete. Shay sighed in relief. Good, he grunted. This place gives me the creeps. Bro, you can't just leave us here, Timmy protested. What the heck is this place? Where is everyone? Why is there a room filled with bloody ancient torture devices next to the garage? Shay put up his hands. I'm sorry, son, but I have orders. I'm just a messenger here. I was told to transfer you here, and that's what I've done. He fumbled around his belt for his keyring. He came over and unlocked the handcuffs and ankle cuffs from both of us. I stretched, rubbing my wrists. I was glad to be out of those suffocating restraints. Thanks for everything then, I said, picking up my extremely light garbage bag of possessions and heading for the door on the left. Timmy reluctantly followed behind. A sign on this door read, "To general population." But when we got to the other side and it slammed shut behind us, I found a hallway filled with more red emergency lights streaming down. An involuntary shiver ran through my body. I remembered those absurd rules that somebody had put up. What had it said about the red lights? My mind raced for a few moments, and then the answer popped up. It said to hide. A man shrieked up ahead, his voice riddled with agony and terror. The hallway split to the right and left, and I couldn't see anyone. Timmy and I stopped. Dude, screw this, Timmy said, turning and running back toward the door that we had come through. He tried pulling it open, but it was firmly locked. The scream came again, louder and closer, but this time it was cut off suddenly. I heard someone gurgling like a man with a slit throat trying to breathe. And then everything went deathly silent again. The gray concrete floor of the hallway had arrows pointing forward on it. There were no doors here. There was nowhere to hide that I could see. Timmy and I reluctantly went forward. As we got to the intersection, we saw the dead body of a man in a brown khaki uniform. His sightless eyes remained open. They stared up at the ceiling, glassy and still filled with horror. Deep gouge marks bit deeply into the flesh on his back and his arms and chest. His throat had been cut or bit open as well. A spreading puddle of red encircled his body. I saw a dark blur at the end of the hallway on the right. It looked like little more than a shadow. I whispered to Timmy, pointing. We decided to go left immediately. My heart was pounding at this point. I felt like a soldier walking through the no man's land of a war zone. I expected the attack to come at any moment. The hallway to the left had some doors. I sprinted forward as quietly as I could with Timmy close by my side. I read the first door. To medical ward. No, I whispered, going to the second one. I heard light footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw a creature from a nightmare sneaking up on us in the bloody glow of the emergency lights. Its skin was black and shiny like that of a centipede's. In its general form, it reminded me of a hairless werewolf. It towered over us, its eyes like bone-white cataracts, its claws as long and sharp as a dagger. And yet its face seemed almost reptilian. It had two small nose holes like a snake and a jaw that unhinged and dropped far below its head. I saw rows of blood-soaked fangs. It gave off a low, gurgling growl that emanated from its chest. With a rush of adrenaline and a sense of mortal terror, I pushed through the second door without reading the sign in the front. Timmy was right behind me. I heard him scream as he fell into me. I found myself in a prison dormitory and we weren't alone. As I hit the ground, I saw a white face peering out at me from behind the bunk bed. The man hiding there saw the abomination behind us and got up, screaming and running away. The creature growled, giving chase. In 2 powerful bounds, it had rushed across the dormitory and grabbed the man by the neck. I looked back at Timmy, seeing him groaning on the ground. Blood poured from deep cuts on his back. I grabbed him, pulling him up. "Let's go, we have no time," I said, but then I was cut off by the sound of a neck snapping. I looked back, seeing the creature had twisted the man's head around in a circle. It raised the limp body to its massive mouth and severed the head in a single and powerful bite. "Get me out of here, man, please," Timmy whispered as I pulled him back out into the hallway. I looked over, seeing another werewolf creature bounding down the hallway, chasing a man in a prison jumpsuit. I had no choice. I pulled Timmy toward the door labeled medical ward. With a creak of rusted hinges, it opened. We went inside to hide. "Maybe there's something in here we can use to bandage you up," I said to Timmy, pulling him down the short hallway toward a room filled with single beds. I didn't know why the rules said to avoid this place. It looked totally empty. Against the back wall, I saw a glass cabinet filled with bandages, rubbing alcohol, band-aids, and other various first aid supplies. I ran toward it. Timmy limped along after me, but still groaning. "God, I think those claws went down to the bone," he said. "Hey, it's gonna be okay," I said as I pulled out some antiseptic and bandages, adding, "Could have been a lot worse." The universe would immediately prove me right. I could hear a slight giggling from under one of the beds. Timmy and I both froze. 2 rotted hands reached out, dragging the mutilated body of a young girl behind them. She had patches of garish, black stitches running across her face, hands and arms as well. Dark and clotted red dripped from the sides. She wore a smeared hospital gown and had no eyes. I looked into the empty sockets. They stared back at me like 2 black holes spinning in the void. As she rose, her giggles became full-blown laughter, a hysterical gurgling like the laugh of a dying person. And then she ran at me. I saw the silver gleam of a scalpel in her little hand. "No!" I screamed, raising my hands to protect myself. The scalpel came down, slicing my palm. It cut deeply. A cold, burning pain ran up my arm. I repressed the urge to scream. At that moment, the red emergency lights flicked off. Bright, fluorescent lights popped on, flickering and strobing in rapid succession. Timmy ran forward, tackling the undead girl. But I saw more small hands reaching out from under the beds, hands filled with sores and squirming larvae. I could see the bones of their hands through necrotic patches eaten into their flesh. I ran for Timmy, grabbing him and hauling him up. "It's time to go now," I screamed, pulling him forward as more undead boys and girls rose up, all with sharp knives and surgical instruments in their little hands. I felt a sudden pain in my leg, and looking down, I saw a knife sticking out of my thigh. The empty eye sockets of a little boy's face stared up at me, grinning like a skull. I collapsed onto the ground as we were surrounded. I prayed to God then, knowing that we would die. I prayed that he would forgive me for all of my mistakes, because I was on a fast track to the afterlife, and I would be seeing him in a few seconds. With a sharp cry of pain, I yanked the knife out of my leg, turning it on my attacker. And then a gunshot rang out. The nearest undead exploded in a shower of fragment and maggots. I looked up, seeing Shay standing at the door, his pistol raised. "Come on," he screamed. "Come on, you idiots, let's go now." Timmy and I didn't need any more encouragement. As Shay continued to blow apart the nearest of the undead abominations, we limped and scrambled towards them. My leg gave a shriek of pain with every step. We got out of the medical ward, battered and bruised but still alive. "Why'd you come back, Shay?" I asked through pained breathing. Shay gave me a frantic look. "When I got back out to the car, the driver was dead. His throat was ripped out or something, I don't know. I grabbed his keys and I came back for you two. I don't know where we are, but I'm getting you out of here," he explained. I looked at him in amazement. I had never thought in a million years that Shay would risk his life to save some scumbag inmates. "So what's the plan?" Timmy asked, sweating heavily, his eyes wild and pained. "How are we getting out of here without dying?" Shay shrugged. "The door locked behind us when we came in," I said, "unless we can break it down and get back to the car." We passed by buttons labeled Emergency Dispatch under glowing red emergency signs. I wondered if we could get help somehow through them. "Halt!" Somebody cried from behind us. I looked back, seeing a man in a black correctional officer's uniform. He ran towards us, his hand on the radio hanging from his belt. But something immediately seemed off about the figure. As he got closer, I realized why. He had no face. His entire head was just smooth white skin, without hair or any signs of features. He spoke again, and the voice seemed to come from all around his body. "You must report to the medical ward," the strange figure said. "We do not allow injured people in the hallways." "Nah, we're fine," Shay said, grinning. "You see, buddy, I work for the DOC too." He pointed at the identification clipped to his breast pocket. The figure raised his radio to his lips. "We have resistance near Dormitory 1. The fake CO said into his radio before any of us could stop him. Shay ran forward, knocking the radio from his hand. The CO instantly straightened up and whipped out his pistol, pointing it at Shay's torso. He fired, and I saw Shay's chest explode in a blossoming flower. "No!" Timmy said, running forward. I saw a silver gleam in his hand, and I realized that he had taken one of the scalpels from the undead Shay had killed in the medical ward. As the fake CO spun to point the pistol at Timmy, Timmy ran into him, stabbing the scalpel deeply into the CO's neck. They fell together with Timmy on top of the fake CO. His body weight drove the scalpel deeper into his white and featureless skin. Blood the color of soot spurted from the wound. The gun went off and the bullet missed Timmy entirely and smashed into the ceiling. The CO's gurgling death throes seemed to come from all around his body. I grabbed Timmy. "Get the guns," I said. "They're both dead and we need them." He nodded, grabbing the CO's gun and taking an extra mag from his belt. I did the same with Shay's gun and magazine. I pressed the button labeled Emergency Dispatch as more faceless men appeared far off down the corridor. And then we fled as fast as we could from that hallway. But seeing as we were both in pretty bad shape, it wasn't very fast. At that point, I was glad to be alive though. We wandered around the prison, avoiding the faceless COs whenever we saw them patrolling the hallways. They would radio to each other, their voices always surrounding their bodies rather than coming from their heads, which I found extremely eerie and unsettling. A couple times I saw men in black SWAT suits with rifles gunning down the fake COs. I wondered if this was the emergency dispatch. Timmy and I avoided them as well, and we gave a wide berth any time that we heard gunfire. We passed cells with mummified corpses hanging from the ceiling. We passed by dormitories where the victims of the strange werewolf-like creatures littered the floors, rotting and stinking like roadkill. Occasionally, I would catch a glimpse of another survivor, a pale face peeking out from some hiding spot. But Timmy and I kept pushing forward, looking for a way out. We were in a sprawling gymnasium, sitting down and resting for a few minutes, when we had encountered the warden. We heard a demonic roar from the hallway, a mixing of many strange and human tongues. As Timmy and I sat up quickly, a decapitated body flew into the gym, and a creature from a nightmare followed after it. The body smacked into the concrete wall with a soft and fleshy whack. The warden stood 10 feet tall, He had on a black correctional officer's uniform and a leather visor cap. His face looked like it had no flesh. A thick layer of bone covered it with two reptilian eyes peering out from behind slitted pupils. He hissed, a forked tongue shooting out of his gaping maw. His fingers looked like sharp daggers of bone. A smell like old leather and blood arose from his body. "Shoot it!" I screamed, raising the pistol and firing at its head. The first shot blew off its visor cap, revealing the hairless, reptilian skull underneath. But the bullet only gouged the top of its head. It ran at us with powerful, bounding stabs, covering the distance in moments. Timmy and I fired as fast as we could as it got within a few feet of us. It bounded into Timmy like a freight train hitting a car. Timmy's body went flying and smashed against the back wall with the sound of bones shattering. I slammed another magazine in the pistol as the warden turned to me. We had hit it. I saw. One of its eyes had exploded in a shower of red and vitreous fluid, and its head was bleeding pretty badly. I raised the gun, aiming for the same eye and firing. The warden smacked his hand against his face as if he had forgotten something, falling to the floor. I ran forward, putting the pistol point blank against his ruined eye before emptying the clip. By the end, he wasn't moving anymore. "Oh God," I said, walking over to Timmy. I saw his shattered legs, his broken spine, and his snapped ribs. He coughed up red. "I'm sorry, Timmy, I really am." His head might have nodded slightly as he died, giving a final death rattle before falling still. I found a ring of keys on the warden's body. In excitement, I ran downstairs and I tried the locked door, and it worked. I went to the van, pulling out the dead driver and starting it up. After smashing through the garage door, I drove it through the gate. It did catastrophic damage to the prison van, but it got me far enough away before the engine finally gave out. I don't know what kind of prison that is, but I hope that I never see that place again. I remember the first time that I did dope like it was yesterday. When I sniffed it, it felt like a powerful, relaxing massage flowing down my body like water. I remember running to the bathroom and throwing up over and over, but it felt so good that I didn't even care. I wouldn't be throwing up the next time that I did it though. My tolerance grew rapidly. Within months, the constant sickness became an ingrained fear, and eventually, my opioid addiction would take over my entire life. No one ever wakes up in the morning thinking, "I really wish I was a penniless, homeless drug addict." No child ever grows up saying that he wants to be a raging alcoholic. No one wants to go to prison, jail, detoxes, rehabs, mental asylums, or graveyards either. But when the addiction takes over, you don't have a choice of what you will or will not do. When addiction screams at you to jump, you only ask, how high? At a certain point, the idea of going without opioids becomes as instinctually frightening as going without food or water. In fact, a lot of addicts would much rather go without food and water than be plunged into the nightmarish, seemingly never-ending withdrawals. An addiction is like having a monkey on your back in some ways. If that monkey was demonic, rabid, and fused into your skin like some sort of sadistic Siamese twin, you know that if you don't do what the monkey says, it'll turn its blood-red eyes to you in fury. You know that it will claw and bite you until you're curled up in the fetal position on the floor screaming, "Please, no more." At a certain point, you don't even want to do the drugs anymore, but there's no real question of it. When the disease has progressed to its final stages, people who are in its grips become like an automaton, a machine. You wake up in the morning and the addiction screams, "Come, come, it's time." And even though you've just opened your eyes, you go over. You know you don't want to do drugs anymore, yet you find yourself sitting in front of them anyway. And after years of this, you give up all hope of ever having a life where you're not a soulless puppet. until the only way out in the end seems like death. But not me. In my conscious mind, I knew that I didn't have a problem, that I just hadn't figured out the perfect way to control my drug usage yet. My delusion told me that there was some grand middle path where I could get high anytime I wanted and then stop whenever I felt like it. I just hadn't figured out the perfect way to stop, but I would in time. Of course, this was insanity. After getting kicked out of my apartment and losing my job, I decided it was time to try rehab again. It certainly wasn't my first time there. I had tried everything before, from prison to jail to rehab to detox to methadone to NA meetings and plenty of other things. Somehow I hadn't figured out the perfect method yet, but because my sickness told me that I wasn't sick, I was convinced it was only a matter of time. Soon I would just quit and be free of this terrible addiction, but certainly not today. It would always have to be next Tuesday or maybe next Friday. Next Friday always seems good and reasonable, until it comes and you realize you're still hopeless and on your way to an early grave. Yet this time was also different in a fundamental way, because really at this point, I did want to stop. The party had long ago ended and now the addiction was a full-time job that paid only in wages of misery and death. So I went to detox for the 12th time. I suffered the same nightmarish withdrawals as a million times before. Not sleeping for days, feeling my heart racing, seeing my hands and fingers trembling, feeling my stomach doing flips as it debated with itself whether it could hold down any food today. And then at the end of this madness, the nurse told me that there were no beds available in their long-term inpatient rehab, which was a place that I knew well, having spent months of my life there previously. So what am I supposed to do? I asked, scowling and furious. I actually wanted to try quitting forever this time, and the universe seemed to be laughing at me. I knew they had a quality rehab program and I wanted back in it. I wanted to try my best at actually paying attention when they told me about relapse prevention this time. Detox only lasted 4 or 5 days, and that is no way enough time for an opioid addict to recover. Someone who just goes to detox and leaves likely has a 99% chance of failure. The admissions nurse with a face like a wary weasel stared impassively through me. I noticed the small ketchup stain on the front of her white uniform. "Well, there are no beds available at our unit," she said. "I mean, with all this fentanyl crap and all the drug courts, there's a 2-month waitlist for a 90-day rehab in our unit now." I looked at her aghast. "I'm trying to get rid of a potentially fatal drug addiction here," I said, as if anybody could ever fully get that monkey off their back. People could get sober, yes, but I knew there were always addicts in the pits of their souls, and many only got through life by struggling one day at a time. "Well, there is an experimental drug rehab a couple of hours away," she said, looking down at a sheet of paper. "They contacted us asking for volunteers. They'll cover all the costs, including transportation to the facility." "What do you mean by experimental drug rehab?" I asked, confused. "Is this like some new method of quitting drugs? It's not run by the Church of Scientology or anything, right?" She laughed at that. "Oh, no, it's nothing like that. Apparently it's a government-run unit. They want to try out new methods of helping people with severe opioid addiction and alcoholism. If you're interested, you can go straight from here tomorrow when you get discharged." I thought about it for a long moment and I nodded at the nurse. "Yeah, sure," I said. "I'm willing to try anything." Drugs had finally beaten me into a state of submission. I remembered the first time that I went to rehab. I scoffed at their insane 12-step programs and their focus on a higher power. I thought that it sounded wacky, and I was in no way interested in drinking their Kool-Aid. Now I would listen to absolutely anything, try anything with even the smallest chance of working. Drugs had so successfully dragged me down that I was finally in a state of reasonableness, a fairly rare thing for an addict, and one that usually takes many years to develop. A black SUV pulled up in front of the detox unit the next day. I wasn't the only volunteer that they had found, apparently. A pretty young blonde girl with ancient, nervous eyes sat next to me, as well as some large guy from Boston with far too many shamrock tattoos on his body and a Red Sox cap on his head. We all sat in the back. The driver had an opaque black window up, preventing us from seeing him or talking to him. "Hey, I'm Haley," the girl said, extending a trembling hand. Her pupils looked large and she looked ill at ease. Though I still wasn't feeling too good, I was immediately interested and shook her hand. "I'm Jay," I said, not feeling overly conversational. The Red Sox guy apparently agreed. "Simon," the man grunted, looking back down at the book that he was reading. I saw with interest that it was the big book from Alcoholics Anonymous. "Do you know anything about this place that we're going to?" I asked them. Simon just murmured and shook his head. It didn't seem like he wanted to talk. But the girl perked up instantly. "Well, the nurse didn't seem to know much, but I read through that the paper they made a sign," Haley said, brushing a lock of her long hair behind her ears. Her perfume reminded me of springtime flowers and mountain peaks. "You read the whole thing?" I said, surprised. I hadn't read any of it. I wondered whether I had made a mistake. She nodded, the faint trace of a smile playing in the corners of her lips. "It's some brand new, totally revolutionary addiction treatment the government has developed in response to all the deaths from the recent crisis," she said. "And do you know what exposure therapy is?" Simon perked up at this, and he pushed his glasses up on his nose. "I've read about that," he said in a deep voice. "That's a way of dealing with phobias, right? Like if somebody is afraid of spiders, they show them pictures and videos of spiders to desensitize them. And eventually maybe they put a spider in a cage in front of them." "Yeah, pretty much," Haley said, and I frowned. "I don't get it. What does that have to do with addiction treatment? Are they going to show us pictures of bodies from overdoses until we change our minds? Because that doesn't work. I already know that I'll die if I don't stop. I think that deep down I've known that for a very long time." Haley just shook her head, bereft of any answers. I have no idea how exposure therapy could apply to addiction treatment. Guess we'll find out when we get there. A couple hours later, we entered a long and winding dirt road. I saw the complex looming out of the top of the rolling New England hills like a knife hilt sticking out of a chest. It was garish. Massive black towers surrounded by electrified fences and rolls of razor wire greeted us as we pulled up to the gate. Smaller wooden guard towers with observation decks like fire watchtowers stood at each of the four corners of the square complex. "This looks like Guantanamo Bay," Simon observed. He suddenly looked very uncomfortable and nervous. He began shifting his large bulk around the seat. The springs gave an exasperated groan, and then he reached back and gingerly pulled his sweatpants out his rear without any sense of embarrassment. "Why do they even need all this razor wire? Why the guard towers?" I asked. The driver up front finally rolled down the divider. "Stay put, guys," the driver said in a nasally, reedy voice. "Don't try to get out until they give the all clear. They have snipers trained in this position if you try anything." "What?" Simon yelled, stunned out of his introspection. "What is this, a joke?" The driver slowly rolled the divider back up in response. I sat there not knowing what to think. A soldier clad in all black came out of a small guardhouse at the entrance. He had a rifle in his hands and the finger on the trigger. He walked slowly over and knelt down. I saw him talk to the driver, but I didn't know what they said. A moment later, he pressed a button and the 20-foot-tall metal gates began to slowly roll to the side. "I have a bad feeling about this," I said as he drove us inside. Haley and Simon both looked pale, their eyes wide and terrified as if we were entering a war zone. A garage door opened in the slick metallic black surface of the towers. They looked like giant, dark lighthouses looming overhead, except they had no windows and no lights. However, dozens of spotlights were placed at the top of the fences in the guard towers. At night, I figured this place would be more lit up than a football stadium. The driver drove into the garage. A sudden darkness overcame us. The doors unlocked with a clicking sound and he rolled down the divider. "Get out," he said abruptly. "Now." We didn't hesitate. I pulled open the door and I was still somewhat excited to see this new revolutionary rehab unit. The razor wire and the rifles had given me quite a bit of pause, but perhaps they kept convicted criminals here in a different unit. The more that I thought about that, the more sense that it made. I began to relax. The driver rolled up his window and wouldn't talk to us anymore. The garage door behind him stayed closed. No one came to greet us. I saw a door nearby and dim light came through at the bottom. Figuring that we could find somebody who worked here over there, I walked over and pushed it open. Haley and Simon followed close behind me. Bright fluorescent lights streamed down over a disgusting mold-filled hallway that disappeared far in front of us in a straight line. I saw patches of black mold rising like hair from the soggy floorboards. Splintering doors stood lining both sides of the hallway, some of them hanging off their hinges and others laid out flat on the floor. "Ew, what is this?" Haley said, a look of disgust crossing her face. Simon pointed to the door. "Hey, there's something nailed to it," he said, "a piece of paper." I looked and he was right. I quickly walked over to it and I pulled it off. It had what looked like splatters of red across the front. I took it, frowning as I read the yellowed, ancient-looking sheet aloud to our little group. Rules to survive the Great Path. 1. Do not sleep in the comfortable room filled with soft moss and poppies. 2. If you see the hobo with a mouth across his stomach, you must kill him. 3. Stay away from the patients in the delirium tremors ward. Anything they see comes true. 4. If you hear the hymns of the needle freak over the speakers, it means they have gotten out and you must hide. Great Path, Simon asked, curious. Is that the name of this place? If you read the contract you guys signed, you would already know that, Haley said, looking closer at the scrap of paper. Is that blood? She had noticed the dark red stains sunk into the ancient paper. Hey guys, I asked, feeling nervous again. Does anybody know that you're here? Like family or friends or anything? They both shook their heads. My family hasn't talked to me in a couple years, Haley admitted sheepishly. Same. Simon grunted and I nodded. Yeah, me too, I said, thinking. Do you think that's why they chose us? Because nobody would notice that we're missing. A look of horror crossed both their faces as they stood there. Like, did you even tell any of your friends? Either of you guys? I don't actually have any friends, Simon admitted, rubbing the back of his hair. Haley just shook her head. Actually, like Simon, I didn't really have any friends anymore. My addiction had sent them all away. Heck, I had given everything away. As I looked back, a deep sense of regret and remorse filled my soul. We started walking down the hallway, avoiding the large patches of yellow and black mold that sprouted like bushes from the soggy wood. The smell like decomposing meat and mushrooms filled the area. Haley wrinkled her nose. The hallway turned at a 90-degree angle. It felt like we had been walking down it for at least 15 minutes. It was mind-boggling how big this place was. I didn't realize it when we had pulled in, but the black towers I saw, they must have extended a few thousands of feet into the hills. Why would somebody build a place this big? Simon asked, looking around with an inquisitive eye. And why would they let the hallways rot and grow soggy like this? It doesn't make any sense. A deep, choking sob cut him off. It came from around the corner. Hello? Haley called out. I grabbed her shoulder, hissing in her ear. Shh, I said. What do you think you're doing? Whoever it is already knows that we're here, she said. She started slowly tiptoeing forward to peek around the corner. A massive, dirty figure ran straight into her, knocking hard into the wall. She smacked her head hard. It made a hollow, bonking sound, like a coconut being dropped on a concrete floor. She stumbled and fell to the ground. She started crawling away as I looked up at the abomination sprinting at me and Simon now. Red streamed from a gash on her forehead. She looked dazed and confused, but I had no time to check on Haley. The eldritch creature wore tattered rags around his shoulders and his waist. His head nearly scraped the ceiling about 8 feet above our heads. I saw red stains and dried yellow pus all over his skin. Deep black spots were eaten into his flesh, forming deep circular patches across his skin, like the blast holes of a nuclear war. Purplish streaks went out in all directions from the infected wounds, running across his body like polluted streams. He turned his face towards us, and I saw a monstrous creature only glimpsed in the wildest of nightmares. In his entirely hairless face, he had one giant eye. It took up the entirety of the front of his head. It rolled in its socket, the pupil large and glassy, the yellow, jaundiced sclera streaked with bloody red veins that stretched outwards like the roots of a tree. His scarred torso had an enormous mouth running across the area where his belly button should have been. The purplish, cracked lips formed into a snarl, showing many razor-sharp fangs. They curved inwards like the teeth of a shark. They snapped and bit at the air, the entire stomach and chest, rippling and morphing as giant muscles worked furiously under his mutilated skin. An odor of rotted cheese emanated from the creature, mixing with the sickly smell of infection that rose from its decaying flesh. He made a sound like a crying baby, his enormous chest mouth opening with an ear-splitting wail as streams of dirty tears ran down his filthy body. Simon turned and ran. With a predator's instinct, the nightmarish hobo gave chase, his naked bloody feet slapping hard against the soggy floor of the hallway as he sprinted forward in a blur. Simon frantically tried a random door and disappeared into a room. Roaring, the creature tried to squeeze through the relatively small door. It looked like a cockroach trying to slip through a tiny crack. It worked its body through the threshold, cracking the wood. It smashed its large, scarred hands against the wood. I heard the building shake with every blow and saw deep fissures running through the wall. I turned, looking for Haley. We needed help if we were going to kill this thing, but realistically, how could we possibly kill it without any weapons? 10 feet down the hallway, a door stood open to a room that glowed with a soft blue light. I walked toward it hesitantly, still hearing the cacophony the creature made as it chased Simon. "Haley," I whispered sharply, "where are you?" I saw drops of red leading into the room from when she had hit her head. I followed them like a trail of breadcrumbs. Beyond the threshold, I saw a beautiful scene. Layer after layer of soft green moss covered the floor. From the ground, unnaturally large opium poppies extended up to the ceiling. They swayed slightly, as if a non-existent breeze blew through the room. A sweet earthy smell radiated from their beautiful pink and white flowers. I felt a sense of calmness and relaxation come over me. A sense of tiredness came over my mind, and my eyelids began to droop. And then I saw Haley laying on the ground asleep. All around her, large, tick-like bugs scattered and ran. Each was the size of a baseball. They took turns biting Haley at areas of exposed skin, latching onto her and sucking her blood. A few had already grown fat and changed from a jet black to a dark red. I looked in horror at Haley's pale face. "No!" I screamed, running forward. I began ripping them off of her, a sense of adrenaline coming over me. It instantly banished any thought of sleep. Haley's eyes fluttered open as drops of red flew from the creature's mouths. I ripped them off one by one. After I had gotten nearly a dozen of them off her, she stood up, dripping red from countless bite marks. Her face looked pale and her lips slightly blue. She wavered on her feet, trembling. I thought that she might pass out, and I held her arm tightly. "Get out of here," I whisper-shouted at her. The monstrous black ticks still circled us, trying to crawl up on our legs and bite us. I kept kicking on them and stomping them. Their bodies exploded under my shoe like a water balloon filled with dark, red blood. Haley and I started to turn when a silhouette filled the doorway. The hobo leered at us from inside the room of moss and poppies. He had Simon's head in one of his filthy hands. the long dirty nails of his fingers biting deeply into his white skin. He threw it at us, hitting me hard in the chest and knocking the air out of my lungs. I screamed, looking down at Simon's cyanotic flesh and sightless staring eyes. His blue lips were pressed together as if in an expression of disapproval. I felt more of the ticks trying to climb up my legs. As the hobo began trying to smash his way through the doorway into the room, getting stuck just like he did before, a desperate idea came to me. I picked up one of the tick creatures, holding it gingerly by its sides. It tried to snap and bite at me like an angry cobra, but I quickly threw it at the hobo's eye. The tick soared through the air in a graceful arc, landing on the hobo's face. Its black, spider-like legs writhed, twisting around the back of his head. The hobo's arms were held back by the door and his body was wedged in the threshold. He screamed as the tick went for his eye. The hobo tried to close the massive lid, but the tick's probing mouth parts punctured through. A waterfall of vitreous fluid and blood streamed down the hobo's face. In a panic, the hobo pulled forwards into the room, taking half of the wall with him. It cracked and fell apart with a sound like collapsing bricks. Haley and I took the opportunity to sprint through one of the newly formed gaps and out into the hallway. Blind, the hobo spun in circles as the ticks surrounded him, crawling up his legs and chest. He smashed himself over and over using his large, scarred hands to splatter their insectile bodies all over his skin, but only more came. And soon he fell down, wailing with noises like a frantic baby under the army of dozens of enormous, mutated ticks. Haley and I ran down the hallway, seeing the rest of Simon's body laying over the threshold of the room that he had tried to hide in. With the final wails of the hobo following us, we fled that pit of horrors only to find that we hadn't gone nearly far enough. We found a staircase and we began climbing. We didn't know where we were going, but we figured if the bottom floor was terrible, perhaps the topmost floor was significantly better. The stairs went up about 15 stories. The rusted rails had fallen off and deep cracks like the fault lines of an earthquake ran through the concrete steps. They looked like they were getting ready to crumble into dust. We opened the door to the top floor. It gave a loud shriek of rusted metal. I winced, glancing down the hallway. It looked like an apocalyptic hospital ward. The white walls had yellowed with age and stained with drops of dark and ancient blood. Smashed windows looked on empty units with rolling beds. Many had pieces of human skin or deep layers of red caking their surfaces. A cacophony of white noise emanated from speakers above our heads. A hissing of static shattered the silence. Haley and I both jumped. And then a diseased, raspy voice began to sound over the ancient speaker system of the hospital ward. The lunatic god stares down black and cold. We eat the bodies of the weak and old. We change ourselves to fit his cries, feeling as our humanity slowly dies. We know that we are dead and weak, and so we all sing the hymns of the needle freak. "Oh God, not again," Haley whispered, her eyes filled with horror. "What's going to happen this time?" I grabbed her hand, hissing in her ear. "Run, run, we need to get out of the hallway." I said as doors slammed open all up and down the hospital ward. I saw dozens of walking corpses slumped forward, shambling and dragging their broken bodies slowly behind them. Some had marks of car accidents, such as the first young man that I saw with pieces of his leg bone sticking out through his skin and a deep gash through his skull. Others looked like they had died of overdoses, some of them still having needles sticking out of their arms. Haley and I chose a random ward, crashing through the door. Empty infant cribs stood all around us. Some had tiny red-stained clothes still in the cribs. I saw another door in the back hanging off of its hinges. I ran through, finding myself in a private room. A man stood there without eyes, the empty sockets barren open like two silently screaming mouths. "My God, what happened to you?" Haley screamed, backing up quickly. I looked at the sign above the door with a growing sense of horror. It read, Delirium tremors ward. They kept coming, he said in a dead voice. The spiders crawling on the floors, the baby crawling on the ceiling. My son, he died, you see, in his crib. I was too drunk to check on him at the time. Didn't find him for 12 hours, but here he's... He stopped, inhaling deeply. They're all here. I felt their claws on me. I saw his blue lips as his head spun around to 180 degrees and he showed me a mouthful of needles. A mouthful of needles. He trailed off, clawing at his hair with dirty hands. I had to take my eyes out to stop seeing. I couldn't keep seeing it, I couldn't. Reality is ripping at the seams. The eyeless man continued, his gouged out socket slowly dribbling red down his cheeks like crimson tears. It's ripping and I have nothing to hold on to now. My son won't stop watching me with those black eyes of his, please, make it stop. As he spoke, I saw something crawling above us in the ceiling. I looked up, seeing the baby. He clung to the ceiling like a spider hanging upside down. His stiff limbs reached forward, dragging himself along and wailing. His head began to spin around until it was completely backwards. The skin on its neck spiraled around in a sickening way. The baby gave a hiss like a snake. Its pure black eyes flew open and it showed a mouth filled with thousands of black needles that shimmered like obsidian under the flickering fluorescent light. Haley walked forward calmly, putting her hand on the man. From the room full of cribs, I heard shuffling and groaning. The corpses were nearing. Your baby has found a way out, Haley said comfortingly. A door, can you see it? It leads to beautiful rolling hills and open fields filled with flowers. The man's face seemed to slacken. I looked behind us, seeing a dead man approaching. He had black stitches running down his chest and countless scars from the drugs over his arms. Behind him, dozens of more corpses writhed and shambled towards us. We were running out of time. A door, the eyeless man said. I don't. Yes, see it, Haley encouraged him. It's a big door and your baby can go through it and find peace. Do you see it? The man hesitated. I saw a door appearing in the wall nearby, slowly phasing into view. The baby's head finished spinning so that its neck was now hyperextended at 360 degrees. And then it gave a triumphant cry and skittered toward the door like a centipede chasing a prey. Beyond the threshold of the door, I saw the forests of New England. The sun beat down natural and beautiful, unlike all this horrible, flickering, fluorescent light. I grabbed Haley's hand and ran through the door. It closed behind us with a popping sound. We found ourselves in the middle of the woods. We began walking and discovered a trail which eventually took us to a road. A couple of hours later, we found a town. Grateful to be alive, we didn't wonder about the fact that we had ended up 5 hours away from where we had started. Haley and I have been sober ever since. I don't know what kind of demonic place we were kidnapped and taken to, but I seriously doubt the government knew anything about it. I tried to find out more information about Gray Path and who ran it, but I couldn't find any evidence even indicating the place existed. After what I saw there, though, I've never had an easier time staying sober. Dealing with the horrors and nightmares of Gray Path, seeing the walking corpses and the end stages of addiction, it changed me in a fundamental way. I no longer have any desire to use drugs, and God willing, I will never ever relapse again. My grandfather was an awful person. I know that's probably not the most kosher thing to say about a close family member, but I think most people who knew him, including him, would agree. He was a stone-faced man, never showed much emotion, and always had a fuse about as short as the balding gray hair atop his scalp. He wore a seemingly perpetual scowl upon his face, and a narrowed brow that seemed to sneer with that "get the heck off my lawn" energy that only a proud boomer could properly muster. I remember one summer my family went out to visit him and my grandma. only for him to chastise my older sister for gaining a little bit of weight. It of course made her cry and quickly devolved into a huge family drama that may never have been fully resolved. In stark contrast, my grandma was the most loving and kind person that I had ever known. So when she passed away a few years ago, it really struck my whole family hard. The funeral was a sordid affair, with my grandfather remaining distant the entire time and not bothering to say a word on her behalf. The rest of the family gave eulogies and tried commemorating her the best that we could, but Grandpa seemed not to notice or care either way. Once the ceremony concluded, most of the guests dispersed from the church. As the attendees thinned, I found myself alone in the pews. Grandpa was seated up at the front, and although I didn't necessarily want to talk with him, I felt as though I should. "Grandpa, I'm really sorry for your loss." He turned to me, a look of spite etched upon his face. He seemed to take note of my expression, and his faltered into a sigh. "Thanks, buddy. A tough day for all of us." He dabbed his forehead with a handkerchief and swallowed hard. In that moment, I saw my grandfather in a way that I never had before. He was broken and vulnerable, newly alone in the world and clearly struggling to come to terms with it. I felt for him, and although we had never had the best relationship, I very much wanted to try and be there for him. Grandpa rose from his seat and approached the casket. He put a hand down upon it, speaking softly under his breath. "Oh, don't worry, darling. I'm right behind you." Grandpa and I talked a bit more, and eventually I decided that he could use some company for the night. Although he was off-putting as a person, he was still family. And there was also something that I always found interesting about him. There was something about him that always enthralled me. Despite his cold exterior, I knew there was more to him than just mean for mean's sake. Either way, no one should have to mourn alone, and so I decided to join him for dinner. After the ceremony concluded, I left the church and went to the store and picked up some fresh steaks, golden potatoes, and asparagus. I figured cooking him a good meal was the least I could do considering the difficult circumstances. My grandparents' old home was considerably more worn and overgrown than last I had seen it as I pulled my car into the driveway. Of course, it was understandable considering the situation, but the difference was stark. It had been well over a decade since the last time I had been out there, and although vaguely familiar, the wear and tear made it seem foreign. Grandpa welcomed me at the door, and the two of us went into the backyard as he fired up the grill. It was a bit awkward at first, but after a beer or two, we started opening up a little more to one another. I told him about my life, my fiancé, work, and he seemed genuinely interested in it. We talked a while as the steaks grilled, but I realized not many are reading this to hear about my fated reunion with my estranged grandfather. This is a place for horror stories after all, and as such, it's probably best to just cut to the chase. Grandpa worked in prison rehabilitation for the entirety of his career. He began at just 18 years old as a prison guard, and eventually worked his way up to warden, which he presided as up until his retirement several years ago. I asked him which prison he worked for, but he sort of avoided the question. "Boy, that's gotta be a tough line of work, huh?" I floated the question out, and he paused to ponder it. He switched the beer in his bottle before shrugging. "Nah, you get used to it, like anything, I suppose. But it'd be a lie to call it easy. Always gotta be on your toes, anticipating things to pop off at any moment. Never know what to expect, really." He told me a few stories that he had from his long tenure of corrections. He almost seemed overly eager to talk about them, and it made me realize that he probably didn't have anybody else to tell them to. He was a bit of a loner after all, and it made me feel for him that his wife and likely only real human connection in the world was now gone. The two of us ate our dinner and continued chatting about his work in the prison industry and the plethora of experiences that he was subjected to there. He had plenty of lighthearted stuff about coworkers and various interactions with inmates, but his tone seemed hampered. I don't know how to explain it, but it was likely there was something else that bothered him, and I decided to try and coax it out of him. You probably saw some messed up things there too, huh? Grandpa sat back and thought, his pale white beard partially obscuring his disconcerted grimace. He then chuckled and put his hands together on his lap. Yeah, you could say that. As I had hoped, he then delved into a few stories about stabbings, attempted breakouts, and attacks on prison personnel. He had no shortage of rather gruesome events to recall, but of course, there was one which had dwarfed them all. Then there were the experiments. My interest peaked as soon as he had said that. He paused then, his head slowly swiveling on his shoulders. Experiments? Yeah, or clinical trials, I suppose. They can sugarcoat them however they like, but that don't change the reality of it. Far as I know, they never even published the findings, and I'm not surprised. He was clearly a bit reluctant to divulge the details, and I didn't want to push him on it. The admission alone seemed to hang like a weight on his neck, dragging his posture down and his eyes into fog. If there is a God out there, I can understand why we never hear from him. And Grandpa said that he had been working at the prison for a good 2 decades when these experiments began. By then, he was the lead guard on shift, and essentially second in command to the presiding warden at the time. Grandpa was summoned by the warden one day for an impromptu meeting, or so he thought. As he entered the room, he found the warden with 2 other men in his office. The 2 men were well-dressed in blue suede suits with polished black wingtips. Both had neatly combed hair and beards with stark blue eyes. The warden introduced them to Grandpa as Mr. Smith and Mr. Johnson, but did not elaborate who they were or what organization they worked for. No doubt it was some government branch, but I never got confirmation either way, Grandpa explained. Apparently, the 2 men had already struck up a deal with the warden, and Grandpa was to be a part of it as well. They explained they were conducting an experiment to test the limits of the human psyche. They explained that all Grandpa would have to do was the same thing that he had been doing for 20 years. Guard the cells and ensure there were no complications with the inmates. The deal came with a substantial financial bonus, one which nearly doubled Grandpa's salary that year. But of course, he knew there would be a catch. The things we do for money. He just shook his head solemnly as he said it. These experiments would go on to be known unofficially as the Seclusion Project. The idea was a simple one. Take 5 prisoners and put them into solitary confinement indefinitely. Smith and Johnson's crew would monitor them and conduct research as they saw fit. The 2 men explained it was important research to determine the harmful effects on the human psyche to further understanding of the brain, but Grandpa saw through it. It was cruel. It was inhumane, and by the end of it, it was a crime against humanity. They knew that from the beginning, but they also knew that no one would speak on the behalf of those they chose. 5 inmates were chosen for the experiment. The warden claimed they had volunteered for a reduced sentence, but Grandpa knew that that was a lie. To put it simply, the 5 chosen were among the worst offenders currently imprisoned. Prisoner 1 was a middle-aged white man who had been convicted of multiple counts of aggravated assault against minors. He had been sentenced to 57 years and had served just 4 up to that point. Prisoner 2 was an elderly white male who had been convicted of the murder and attack of 6 different female workers over the span of 9 years. He had been given 3 life sentences and was the longest currently incarcerated inmate in the entire prison. Prisoner 3 was a black male responsible for the stabbing of an elderly couple and their 7-year-old grandson as a result of a home invasion. He had been sentenced to capital punishment and had been on death row for almost 5 years awaiting his fate. Prisoner 4 was a middle-aged Hispanic male who had once served as a hitman for a notorious drug gang. He had been convicted of executing 8 people and disposing of their remains during his tenure, though many believe his body count was much higher. Prisoner 5 was actually the only inmate that wasn't currently incarcerated at my grandpa's prison. He was brought in from another prison, but Grandpa was never able to get a hold of his file to see where he was transferred from and what he was currently in for. He described the guy as a young, very skinny, white male with long black hair and evil eyes. Grandpa said he locked eyes with the guy once and only once, viscerally rattled by the experience. The cells in which the participants were to be housed were in an isolated wing of the prison deep underground. Each cell had been retrofitted with a number of augmentations which were completed by Smith and Johnson's crew. It took them almost a full year to complete it, but once they were done, the cells were unlike any others. Entirely soundproof from the inside, and entirely devoid of light. Cameras equipped with both infrared and night vision lenses were installed upon the ceiling of each cell to monitor the occupants 24/7. Finally, the renovations were completed and the cells were ready to fulfill their grim purpose. One by one, Grandpa and his team escorted the men into each of the cells. Most went quietly without a word spoken. Grandpa theorized that the men were given promises of commuting their sentences, which helped ensure their compliance, but this was never confirmed. Inmate 3 talked non-stop throughout the trek to the cell, asking all manner of questions about a variety of things. Grandpa and his men just remained silent. Inmate 5 was mostly silent during the transport as well, his long dark hair covering his face the entire way. At several points, Grandpa swore that he heard the guy giggle under his breath. He said that it sounded like a kid's laugh, and that obviously didn't make him feel any better. The guy went into his cell without protest, and as his door shut, the trials had officially begun. All the lights in the block were extinguished, and the outer soundproof doors were shut. Each cell was separated far from one another to prevent the inmates from being able to communicate verbally. From there, all the supervising team had to do was wait and watch. Grandpa simply went back to his duties then, checking in periodically on Smith and Johnson's team, but never venturing into the cell block. The inmates were to have no contact with the outside world whatsoever, and no exposure to light of any kind. Small slots in the walls were used to distribute food and water, and the inmates were well fed with good hearty meals unlike the majority of the other inmates in the prison. Grandpa continually emphasized how uncomfortable he was with the whole thing, even from the get-go. "Why didn't you say anything?" I bit my tongue as the words left my lips, worried that I would offend him. Grandpa just sighed, his shoulders slumped as his lips pursed. "It's hard to speak on behalf of those that you detest, even if you know they're being wronged." There was a profound truth to his words, and it made me take pause as he added another thought. It's not an acceptable excuse, but he just trailed off there, shaking his head and sighing. After just a few days of seclusion, the inmates were already struggling quite a lot. Inmate 2 had been crying periodically, while 3 showed signs of severe paranoia. The other 3 remained mostly silent. 5 was the most unnerving, however, sitting almost entirely motionless for the entire day aside from sleeping. 4 tried to keep himself busy doing push-ups and sit-ups, while 1 mostly just laid around in various positions, slipping in and out of consciousness. On the eve of day 5, Inmate 2 had slammed his head into the side of the cell and began bleeding from his nose and mouth. After the impact, he fell and convulsed for several seconds on the ground as blood dripped from him. He fell still, and my grandpa anticipated them conducting a medical intervention, but they never did. They just continued to monitor as Inmate 2 was left to his own devices. Later that same day, Inmate 3 suddenly screamed. He began scrambling around his cell blind, slamming into walls and babbling incoherently. "There's something in here, man! Let me out!" He shouted the words as tears poured from his eyes. He continued freaking out for a few more minutes until tiring himself out. He then collapsed onto the ground, panting heavily, staring upward to the top of the cell. He couldn't have seen it, but my grandpa swears that he was staring directly into the feed of the camera. Inmate 1 began having conversations with himself, apparently acting as both parties on either side of the conversation. The things he discussed with himself began as asinine, even comical at times, but they quickly took a disturbing turn. He role-played conversations between a young boy and his father, and the things discussed turned Grandpa's stomach. He wouldn't repeat or even hint at them, but considering why Inmate 1 was imprisoned in the first place, I can probably fill in the blanks. Inmate 1 then broke down, sobbing quietly as he held himself in the fetal position. My grandpa says this was the moment that really made him actually feel something for the inmates and question what he had signed up for. "These men did horrible things, there ain't no change in that. But even so, you come to realize how everyone has a story. Were they born monsters or were they made monsters? I won't pretend to understand how these things work, but what I do understand, from one human being to another, is the suffering of life." Things only got worse from there, and outbursts of screaming and sobbing became commonplace among all participants, minus Inmate 5. Alone in the silent darkness, they had nothing but their own minds to keep them company, and that company was clearly not bringing much comfort. Inmate 4 would often pantomime holding a gun and seemingly acting out shootouts and conflicts in his cell. His breathing would increase and he'd be moving and ducking around the cell as though he were trying to avoid getting shot. Inmate 3 would shuffle around his cell, flinching randomly and at times collapsing to the ground as though somebody had struck him. Inmate 2's condition had continued to deteriorate. Clearly his head wound trauma had likely caused a brain trauma, and he would often suffer seizures and fits of screaming at the top of his lungs. He refused to eat, and the food that he was given began to pile up by the cell door. Some of the prison personnel wanted to retrieve him for medical assistance, but Smith and Johnson wouldn't allow it. They were told time and time again that no matter what happens to the inmates, they were not to intervene. By day 9, Inmate 2 was dead. He had been laying motionless face down for nearly a full day when his passing was finally confirmed. As they rewound the footage to try and determine the time of death, they noticed something odd. As soon as Inmate 2's chest had stopped moving, Inmate 1 suddenly perked up. He then lifted his head and smiled, extending his hand to wave at something as though he were saying goodbye to an old friend. He of course had no way of communicating with Inmate 2, nor knowing that he had passed. It was a weird event, but it was regarded as a simple coincidence. Inmate 1 continued to deteriorate after that, spending most of his time just sitting catatonic in his cell. Inmates 3 and 4 also confirmed to show signs of severe delusions and paranoia. Inmate 4 would randomly burst into fits of screaming, as though he were threatening a rival before reverting to hysteric sobbing as he begged to be let out of his cell. At one point, he punched the wall full force, shattering his fist into a mangled mess of flesh and bone. Contrary to the rest, Inmate 5 hardly ever made a peep. He would sit motionless in his cell for hours, hiding his face as he seemed to meditate. Every once in a while, he would look directly into the camera lens though, despite not being able to see it. My grandpa said that he still gets chills picturing the way the guy smiled, and swears something about him was downright evil. "Let me ask you a question," Grandpa suddenly interrupted his tale. Behind the smoldering campfire, I spied him staring down at his boots, swirling his whiskey in his glass. His eyes then drifted to me, an almost hesitant aura in his eyes. Is it evil to do evil things to evil people? I thought about it for a moment, a cold chill slithering down my spine as I anticipated where this topic was headed. I wish I could say that I came up with some profound response, but I didn't, and I still don't have one. In the end, I just shrugged and took a swig of my lager. Grandpa's expression then shifted, as though he were at a similar stalemate himself. I fear the day the world finds an answer to that question. Eventually, the team conducting the trial brought medical supplies to Inmate 4. As soon as the guard slid open the access port at the bottom of the door, Inmate 4 lunged for it. "Let me out, please. You gotta let me out or do anything." He tried grabbing at the guard through the port, but the guard managed to retreat away. He then slammed his baton on the man's hands until he recoiled back inside. The guard flung the tray of food along with the medical supplies in after him and slid the port shut. Inmate 4 began to sob hysterically, switching between bargaining and yelling threats for nearly half an hour. He eventually seemed to wear himself out and collapsed in a heap in his cell, but not before muttering one final chilling phrase. "Please don't let it get me." Grandpa ended up working late that night, and just before he clocked out was when it had happened. One of the other guards frantically called him to the monitor station. On the feed, Grandpa saw Inmate 4 flailing around desperately and screaming. He said it seemed like something was attacking him, but of course, there was nothing else in there. By this point, the two station guards had already witnessed so many disturbing events that they wanted to intervene and help the guy, but Grandpa overruled them. His chest seemed to deflate as he admitted that, but in the end, all the three of them did was watch. Inmate 4 continued to wrestle around for several long minutes until finally falling flat on his back. He then began to grasp for his neck and appeared as though he believed someone was straddling his chest and choking him. He began to gurgle and cough, flailing desperately as his eyes bulged from their sockets. In under a minute, he let out a soft gasp as the strength drained from his body, and he fell still, never to move again. Once again, the moment that Inmate 4 fell still, Inmate 1 perked up. Just as before, he then smiled and waved while staring in the direction of Inmate 4's cell, despite not knowing where he was housed or even that he was there to begin with. Inmate 5 then suddenly perked up from his fetal position, his neck craned backwards and head angled upwards, but his face seemed entirely devoid of emotion. "Please, don't let it get me." He repeated the final words of Inmate 4 in a whisper. He, like Inmate 1, had no way of knowing nor hearing Inmate 4, and yet somehow repeated the exact same phrase. As the words left his mouth, his lips curled into a wide, almost inhuman smile. Grandpa described it as the look worn only by the most deranged of lunatics. Inmate 5 then erupted into a bellowing laugh which caused everyone in the observatory room to flinch. Grandpa said that he was nearly scream laughing at the top of his lungs as his eyes seemed to bulge out of their sockets. After a good full minute, he finally seemed to quiet as his calamitous laugh quieted to a hushed giggle. "Please don't let it get me." He then turned and once again glared directly into the hidden camera lens in his cell. Grandpa described that moment as feeling like he was staring into the eyes of the devil himself. He had seen enough for that night, but before leaving, Smith caught up with Grandpa as he was about to head out. He first made casual conversation with him before asking him a series of strange questions. "You ever see anything weird around here? How are you sleeping lately? You guys get a lot of inspections in this facility." Grandpa didn't say much in response, just shrugging off most of the questions. Smith tried to code his inquiries in a nonchalant manner, but Grandpa knew better than that. There was no way of hiding the dread which dripped from his every word, for Grandpa felt it too. The following morning, Grandpa got a call as he was preparing himself for his shift. The call was from a frantic coworker telling him they needed him there ASAP, but didn't clarify what had happened. Grandpa arrived at the prison not long after, and was quickly ushered into the camera room. There he noticed that inmate 5's cell was suddenly empty. Grandpa asked where inmate 5 was, and the solemn guards had just guided his attention to the monitors. They played the recording from the previous night at just before 3 a.m. Grandpa watched mystified as 1 second, inmate 5 was seen sitting idle before suddenly just vanishing. There was no split in the feed, no movement of any kind. Just 1 second he was there and the next he was gone. Grandpa stared at the other 2 guards, but neither of them had any explanation for what had just happened. One of them suggested going into the cell to check it out firsthand, but none of them were eager to do that. Instead, they waited around spitballing theories until Johnson and Smith arrived along with the warden. Grandpa then informed them what had happened and showed them the video from inmate 5's cell the previous night. Grandpa said that that was the first and only time he ever saw any emotion on their faces, and their reaction clearly conveyed their fear. "Lock the prison down now. No one comes in or goes out," Johnson commanded, and the befuddled warden sounded the alarm. Every single prisoner in the entire complex was returned to their cells. Grandpa and the other guards spent the next 12 hours combing every square inch of the prison. Despite their best efforts, not a single trace of inmate 5 was found. The search was eventually extended beyond the prison walls, but once again the attempt proved futile. Eventually, Smith and Johnson ventured in to search the seclusion cell block themselves. By this point, only inmates 1 and 3 were still alive in their cells. Neither of them reacted as the men entered the block. Inmate 1 continued just rocking back and forth, mumbling, while inmate 3 appeared to be asleep. Smith and Johnson were in there for nearly an hour before returning defeated and stupefied. They didn't say much to the others, and by that point, the entire staff was exhausted from the day's events. Grandpa and his crew were dismissed as the night crew took over. Grandpa said that he had some of the worst nightmares of his life that night, and barely slept a wink despite being exhausted. When he returned to work the following day, he found the other members of his crew looking much the same. They were all summoned into the meeting room with the warden as they awaited their instructions. The warden then informed them that the experiment had been discontinued. The only surviving members of inmate 1 and 3 were to be returned to general population. Grandpa protested that decision but was overruled. It turns out that Grandpa was right to be wary, as neither inmate lasted long when back in the prison. Inmate 3 began behaving like a cornered animal, showing signs of paranoia and aggression. He got in multiple fights with other inmates, until one scuffle ended with him getting his head slammed into a bed. He ended up dying from severe cranial hemorrhage not long after. Inmate 1 was much more composed, but not less traumatized. He just kept to himself, refusing to eat and isolating himself from everyone. After about a week of his self-imposed starvation, Grandpa's team prepared to intervene. They found him dead in his cell the following morning. His body was taken in for autopsy, but the coroner could not determine a cause of death. Apparently, the fallout from this event caused the former warden of the prison to step down. My grandfather was named the new warden shortly thereafter, but a lot of the other guards ended up leaving as well. For a while, the management was worried about a potential legal investigation, but as time went on, there was nothing. They never heard from Smith or Johnson again, and in time, people forgot altogether. But Grandpa never did. He polished off the remainder of his beer and clasped his hands before him as he concluded his story. The campfire had been reduced to smoldering coals by then, and Grandpa's once serious demeanor appeared suddenly much more crestfallen. We all do things we're not proud of, you know. We all make decisions for what we think is the best option. But sometimes we're wrong. I did it for the money, there's no denying that. But why did they do it? Smith and Johnson, or whatever their real names were. Why did they do it? His gray eyes drifted to me, as though he expected me to answer. More than likely, he searched for any answer that could be offered, but I hadn't one to give. Did they ever find him? That prisoner that disappeared? And Grandpa's head slowly swiveled side to side as his eyes seemed to deflate. As far as I know, he was never seen again. It was in that moment that I almost found myself skeptical. He had told his story so well that I very nearly believed it. You're messing with me, I called him on it, but his face didn't falter an inch. He slowly turned to me with that cold, ironclad stare that he was renowned for. He didn't need to say anything in his defense, for his expression told me that his words were true, and they had haunted him for a lifetime. How does that happen? How does somebody just vanish into thin air? And Grandpa shrugged at the question and massaged the back of his neck. He thought for a moment and then smirked, but refused to make eye contact. If you can figure that one out, you let me know. He chuckled to himself and then crossed his arms. There was one report years ago. This young gal was at home alone one night when someone tried to break into her house. Poor thing was scared stiff, and the description she gave of the man she had seen seemed to match inmate 5. He met my bewildered stare as I hung on every word. So the cops looked around, but they couldn't find anything. Things calmed down, and then about a month later, that same young lady vanishes. Never seen again, never solved. He paused once more and then scoffed as he adjusted his posture. 'Cause it's impossible, right? All of it is. That's what I would say if somebody told me, but yet I was there. I seen it. He fell silent once more as the two of us contemplated the prospect. I figured it best to allow him to convey his thoughts, and so I waited until he spoke again. Maybe it's best we don't know. But there was one detail of that troubling story which really spooked me. There was a message written in blood on the front of her house. He paused and glanced at me, as if waiting for me to conclude the thought. It struck me then, and a cold chill slithered down my spine. "Please don't let it get me," I answered, and Grandpa nodded solemnly. The two of us just fell silent for a while, contemplating the disturbing story before he spoke again. "There's a phrase I've heard before, maybe you have too. Hurt people hurt people. People that have been traumatized will traumatize others. Maybe that's what these things we call demons are. Trauma that takes on a life or an existence of its own." He paused and I contemplated his words once more. It was a frightening thought, but I haven't the faintest clue how these things work, so maybe he's right. It's the best explanation that I can think of, but what do I know? I've screwed up my own life enough that maybe I'm just trying not to hate myself. His eyes seemed to gloss over and his lips trembled. He seemed like he so desperately wished to pour his heart out and for once be vulnerable, but as always he didn't. "Good talk, bud. Don't stay up too late." That was all I got. His last parting words before taking his leave. It was the last conversation that we ever had, but his words have been with me ever since. I don't know what to make of his story, but he sure seemed to put a lot of stock in it. It horrified me knowing what he was a part of, but I suppose I shouldn't be that surprised. I'm sure there's all sorts of nefarious experiments and trials in the past, but that's not really what this account was for. Grandpa was a complicated man who lived a complicated life. I never knew him well, but I'm glad that I got to know him a little bit. It makes his sour demeanor throughout the years a little less imposing, and it sheds some new light on why he was the way that he was. I just hope he found some peace before the end. But after what I heard, I'm not so sure that it worked out that way. Grandpa passed away a few weeks after my grandmother did, so I suppose he was right when he shared those words with her. I heard from my aunt later that he had been found in his favorite chair, a cup of coffee beside him with a single piece of paper in his lap, etched in a simple handwritten phrase which rattled me to my core. "Please don't let it get me." I'll be blunt, I might have been a mess up for most of my life, so the job opportunities weren't exactly lining up in front of me. After a couple of hundreds of resumes sent out, only one job came through. Silverwood's Prison, located in a tiny town that nobody has ever heard of, in the most desolate area of my country. As if that wasn't sketchy enough to immediately decline the offer, but they would also pay me 3 times my previous salary. Do I even have to mention how desperate I've been for money? Just in the past year, I lost my previous job, my girlfriend, and my mother passed away from a horrible disease, diagnosed far too late to even begin to treat. Not to talk about how I took up a stupid student loan to pay for an education that I never got to use. Maybe this is enough to understand why I happily agreed to move away from everyone and everything that I had ever known, in a desperate attempt at starting over. In all honesty, I don't quite remember applying for that job, but having sent out hundreds of applications for various jobs and fallen into a deep pit of depression, I didn't have the luxury of declining. Though I wouldn't call myself suicidal, being risky enough to somehow end up on the wrong side of life didn't seem like such a bad deal. I started on a Monday, and though I might not possess many valuable life skills, I sure as hell am a punctual person. The drive wouldn't be more than 10 minutes according to the GPS, yet I must have gotten lost somewhere. After 5 minutes, I entered a forest with roads so run down and ridiculous turns that shouldn't even exist, as the road to work was mostly a straight drive. Despite having left my new home in the twilight hours, it had darkened during my short drive as time itself had reverted back on me. I arrived a little past 7, just a few minutes late despite having left with an ample amount of time. Not the best first impression, and so I hurried myself towards the main gate. The yard was clearly in view from the parking lot, empty at that time of day. It awoke an eerie feeling of desolation, but I shook it off as first-day jitters. Just inside the main entrance, a guard greeted me from the reception. A mountain of a person sitting in a chair about to give up on the massive creature sitting on it. He was reading a heavily torn book, holding it upside down while doing so. His name tag read, Herbert Johnson. Seeing me completely out of place awoke him from whatever story he had been reading. You must be the rookie. Howard over there will give you the tour." A tall but quite skinny man walked over and shook my hand. "Howard Banks. Oh, so you're the new guy, huh?" "Yeah, that would be me," I responded. My tardiness didn't even faze them, and so I glanced down at my wristwatch only to see that I had somehow arrived 10 minutes early. Howard took note of my confusion and smiled. "It happens to us all, don't worry about it. You looked over the notes that we sent you." "What notes?" "The Zelensky protocol," Howard shot back. "What?" Never mind, it ain't that important." Howard took me through the endless, empty hallways. No staff or inmates to be seen anywhere. "Man, I do not envy you. You're about the 4th one to take the job this quarter," he said. Excuse me, the 4th? "Oh shit, they didn't tell you," he said, surprised. "Everyone that works under Dr. Zelensky eventually quits. No clue why, but so far they all have." I wasn't quite sure what to make of that statement. He said it with such glee and humor that I thought he might not be serious. Or maybe that fact brought some entertainment to his otherwise boring job. Whatever the reason, he didn't make me feel too comfortable. "That's the doctor over there, so your job will pretty much be to follow him around while he checks on the sick inmates." The doctor was walking around the block with his head down in a chart. "Hey, Doc," Howard called out. Zelensky briefly lifted his head to glance in our general direction. "Who's the kid?" he asked. "Well, it's your own personal guard. You can't just roam around here on your own anymore, not after the last incident," Howard said, another ominous statement said fictitiously. "All right, whatever you say. Walk with me." The doctor nodded his head at me. We started walking down cell block D, which on its own could house around 40 inmates. While all the cells were empty, they were clearly inhabited, based on personal effects and messy beds. "Where is everyone?" I asked. "Out in the yard. I like to do my rounds in peace. Only my patients remain inside." "But I just walked by the yard there." "Yeah, well, that's something you'll just have to get used to." Zelensky led me to the infirmary, a surprisingly modern clinic with enough room for 8 patients who required more intensive care, and a separate room for more ambulatory inmates. "All right, you stay outside while I see a couple of patients and finish my paperwork. Keep yourself occupied however you see fit." He pointed to an old wooden chair with a broken leg. The 2 nurses working in the infirmary alongside Zelensky looked exceptionally burnt out. They were tending to the clinic's only 2 patients, both old and holding on to life by a thin thread. I sat on the chair, ready to kill some time by browsing the internet. Zelensky himself clearly didn't care, and there were no threats around. Of course, as I opened the browser, I realized that there weren't any bars, no connection to the internet at all. "Great," I sighed to myself as Zelensky interrupted. "All right, kid, let's move on." I snapped back to attention, Zelensky gesturing me to follow him back into the cell block. "Well, that was quick," I said. "Quick? That was 3 hours." I quickly glanced down at my phone to check, and sure enough, 3 hours had gone by. I looked back at Zelensky. He noticed my confusion and he chuckled. Don't worry about it. That happens around here sometimes. Time is not always what it seems. He waved his hand again to get me to follow. I was dumbstruck, but I did as I was told. We walked down the cell blocks to a room just around the corner, separated from the rest and covered by solid walls as opposed to the usual bars. Cell 144. This patient is not going to hurt me, so stay out here unless I call for you, he demanded. I did as commanded and he went inside. Despite the walls, it was easy to overhear the conversation going on. "Good morning, Harold," Zelensky said casually. "How are you feeling today?" "Who the hell are you? Where's my doctor?" Harold snarked back. "I am your doctor," he said, completely unfazed by the rudeness. "In fact, I'm only the one who's been doing these rounds for the past 10 years. There was a moment of silence while I heard someone writing on paper. "I ain't even supposed to be in here. I didn't do anything wrong." "You killed someone, Harold. I keep telling you, but you never listen." "I know, but it was well within my rights. She broke into my house in the middle of the night." "She was your wife." "Well, that's what she said too, and maybe she even had the same voice, but it wasn't her." Zelensky sighed. "Until you can come to terms with what you did, there's nothing more that I can do for you." There was a small window on the door for me to see through, but Dr. Zelensky was standing in front of the patient, so there wasn't much to see. As far as I could tell, he was changing some bandage covering the patient's head. Within a couple of minutes, he had finished with the patient, leaving him to continue his day in the tiny cell that had become his home. "All right, kid, back to the clinic. More paperwork awaits." "How come that guy didn't come to the clinic like the others? What's his deal?" I asked. Poor sap. He suffers from prosopagnosia, facial blindness. He couldn't even recognize his own wife, so he killed her." I felt a mixture between sadness and anger, conflicting emotions leaving unable to decide if I should judge or pity the man. You gotta feel for the guy though. He didn't even realize what he was doing. Just thought some stranger had broken in. I take it the insanity plea didn't work. "Oh, it worked," Zelensky said. "That's why he's locked in that room, but not for killing his wife, no. Here we have murderers and violent criminals, the worst of the worst. It's what happened next that sent him in there." "Next?" "Yeah, as he went into the bathroom to clean himself up, he realized a stranger was looking back from the mirror, so he decided that he would remove his own face with a kitchen knife." Zelensky paused, checking over to see if I was too disgusted for him to continue. Truth be told, I was, but he went on anyway. After that, he decided that it wasn't enough, and so he cut off his scalp and tried to remove his eyes. Luckily, the screaming that ensued was enough to wake the neighbors, who promptly called the police. He passed before he could finish, which is why he still has one functioning eye. I shook my head and mumbled under my breath, "What the hell?" "This is the mildest form of horror that you'll see here, so are you really sure you want to work here, kid?" "It's not like I have a choice, and also I have a name," I firmly responded, trying to sound more confident than I actually was. Zelensky scoffed. "You'll have a name if you can take working here more than 1 week." We started heading back to the clinic. One of the cells was now quarantined, plastic drapes sealing off the entire thing. "Hey, that wasn't sealed off like that when we got here," I told Zelensky. "Yeah, that's cell 89, it does that sometimes. Just don't ever go inside." "What do you mean it just does that?" "Some days it's quarantined, other times it ain't. Can't explain it, and quite frankly I don't want to. People who get curious tend to vanish. How else do you think you got this job?" He said it so matter-of-factly that it was clear that he had been dealing with it for years. Much like the lapse of time earlier, he simply brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal. I spent the rest of the day hanging around the clinic, waiting for Zelensky to finish his paperwork. "All right, time to head home. Make sure you're out of here before 6:10, otherwise you're gonna have to spend the night." "Why? Do they lock the prison?" No, I mean you physically won't be able to leave. Happened to me a couple of times, a weird feeling to say the least. And then he shrugged and he packed up his briefcase. Be ready for tomorrow, kid. It's gonna get a lot weirder. Needless to say, I've sent out a few extra resumes, but for the time being, I'm stuck working at Silverwood's prison. Once again, I headed back to the prison, and once more I was taken aback by the immense darkness surrounding me. Time simply didn't move in a straight line on that road. I arrived just a few minutes before my shift started and headed inside. Again, the yard was empty as I entered the building. Hey, you're late, rookie, Herbert said without looking up from his book. What are you talking about? I'm 5. I glanced at my phone to check the time. I was suddenly an hour late. Once again, time had elapsed without my knowledge. Shit, I am late. Well, that's what I said, rookie. A lot of crazy stuff goes down in this prison. That's why I'm staying here close by the door. I jogged the rest of the way to the clinic. Luckily, Zielinski was still there doing paperwork. Doctor, I'm sorry, time just got, I said before he interrupted. I know it happens sometimes. There isn't anything to do about it. Don't worry. He looked up from his papers. In fact, you're right on time. I do need your help for the patients in the basement. You keep patients in the basement, I said, sounding more shocked than intended. Well, yeah, they aren't exactly what you would call sentient. Right, are you going to explain what that means? Even if I did, you wouldn't understand it, he said. We started walking through the same cell block as last time, cell block D, and it was completely empty yet again. Dr. Zielinski, where are the inmates? I asked. Oh, they're out in the yard, pretty much where they spend all their free time. Not that many are kept in Block D anyway. Yeah, but I just arrived and I didn't see anybody in the yard. Oh yeah, as I mentioned yesterday, it doesn't exactly work how you would expect it. Basically, you can't really see the yard from outside. What do you mean? Well, there's some weird filter out there. You can only see the people in the yard from the inside. And that makes absolutely no sense. Maybe not, but clearly reality doesn't care if it makes sense to you now, does it? I didn't ask any further questions. Clearly no one knew and it wasn't worth the risk to explore it. He led me towards the basement, which was through Block D. There were 3 doors leading to different parts of the building, such as a generator room, a storage facility, and finally the basement. To get down, we had to push ourselves through a narrow staircase crudely built into a narrow tunnel. All the walls were made out of mountainous terrain the passage had been dug into, which were all dimly lit up by bulbs hanging from the ceiling. The basement was large with multiple rows of beds covering the entire room. Next to each bed stood frail patients with intravenous lines hanging down from empty medicine bags. None of the people moved. They simply stood idly next to their beds, all facing the same direction. What the hell? I said out far too loud. Yeah, we've got to change their banana bags and then put them back to bed. Do they always stand like this? Yeah, they usually get up a few times a week. Zielinski headed for a line of fridges, each filled to the brim with medical bags, or banana bags as he called them. The patients had swollen feet from standing still so long, with visible varicose veins running up and down each leg. I walked carefully up to one and waved my hand in front of his eyes. He didn't react at all. So what happened to them? I asked. That beats me. They've been here since I started. Sometimes one of them will simply disappear, and a new one might just walk himself into the prison. We usually find the new ones wandering aimlessly around the halls. He looked over at my terrified face. Don't worry, kid, they're completely harmless. Upon closer inspection, they were obviously alive, though saying that they were actually living might be an overstatement. I could see their chest move and visible breath came out of them as if they were in the cold. Would you kindly help me?" Zelensky interrupted. Together, we changed each bag. 34 patients occupied the basement, and afterwards we put them to bed. "How come we don't just tie them down?" They don't seem to like it. They keep wriggling and the ropes dig into their skin. It's an awful sight. Only tried it once and let me tell you, I ain't cleaning up the blood this time." After putting them back to bed, Zelensky put bandages on their legs for compression against the blood pooling in the legs, he said. And then he walked around and counted them. 30, 31, oh shit. What? 3 of them are missing. Well, didn't you say they randomly disappear? Yeah, I did, but never more than 1 at a time. We've got to search the prison, but prepare yourself. This might be an ugly sight. We ran upstairs back to Block D. We found the first patient fairly quickly, a lady who looked to be about 300 years too old for life. Somehow, her arm was stuck inside the wall, not by breaking it, but to the best of my explanation, she appeared to be morphed inside of it. "Oh, for God's sakes, not again," Zelensky said. "All right, look, stay here and keep an eye on her. I'll be back with some tools in about 5 minutes. Whatever you do not stop looking at her. If you do, she'll move further inside the wall." And with that, he ran off. I simply stood speechless, looking at the woman who didn't seem to care that her arm had become one with a concrete wall. She was as catatonic as every other patient from the basement. I did my best to follow orders and not let her out of my sight, but my concentration was broken by the sounds of footsteps behind me, slowly walking in my direction. It sounded like somebody was wearing wet shoes, dripping all over the floor. The sound echoed through the halls, getting louder for every step. "Dr. Zelensky, is that you?" I asked. There was no response. The sound got louder, mixed with strange, guttural breathing. I couldn't resist. I turned around to see what horrors had been making that sound, but of course, nothing was there. I stared into the empty halls, looking for whatever had made those disgusting noises. The shock had almost made me forget the woman who was stuck in the wall. When I checked on her again, her head had morphed inside the wall alongside her arm. The part of her still outside was convulsing. Not knowing what else to do, I ran over and attempted to pull her out, but it didn't do anything. Before I knew it, Zelensky had come running back with a sledgehammer and an electric drill. "What happened?" he asked. I couldn't. Out of the way," he yelled as he smashed the wall with the hammer. It took over a full minute to destroy the wall, and by the time Zelensky finally broke through, the woman was long gone. I flopped to the floor with my back against the wall in despair. It was my fault that she had died. "Alright, so what happened?" he asked me calmly. I tried as best as I could to explain what I had heard, but my words were jumbled and nothing seemed to make sense, not even to myself. But Zelensky seemed very understanding. "Hey, it wasn't your fault, kid." I was surprised at the statement, to say the least. Sometimes you hear strange sounds, and most of the time it ain't anything good. Your own safety comes before anything else. That's the first rule to surviving here. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," was all that I could respond. He thought for a bit. "You go home, have a few beers, and then we do it all over again tomorrow. This place, it's horrifying, but as long as you do as I say, we're safe. I promise you that much." I nodded and packed my things and got out of there. At the time, I wasn't sure if I would ever return, but the thought of letting somebody else suffer that job, of facing yet another failure in my life, was unbearable. On my way out, I saw Herbert still sitting in his booth, now doing a Sudoku puzzle. "Will you be back again tomorrow?" he asked. "Yep," I responded without looking at him. After a mostly sleepless night, I arrived much earlier than usual in the morning. I found Dr. Zelensky and Howard having breakfast together. Howard normally worked the night shift, but today he was assigned to the infirmary alongside myself. "What's happening today?" I asked. "Unscheduled prison transfer," Howard said. "From where?" Nobody knows, but soon a bus will arrive with anything from 0 to 10 prisoners and they all have to be checked in. Zelensky was reading a newspaper dated 2 weeks ago while sipping his coffee, completely ignoring my presence. Before I could sit down with them, a phone started ringing. Zelensky was brought to attention and answered the call, letting out a few mumbles, signifying that he heard whoever it was on the other end, and then he hung up. Alright guys, we've got 3 new prisoners and they're all of the peculiar type, so this might take a while. When you say peculiar, do you mean like Harold in room 144? Or like the basement people? Howard asked. Yes, Zelensky said. Well, that's not a very helpful response, Howard said. It didn't take more than a few minutes before a couple of guards that I hadn't seen before came walking up to the infirmary, rolling a wheelchair in front of them. A small, thoroughly broken man was sitting naked in the wheelchair. I say man, but any gender assigned to him would be a dubious proposition at best, if he even could be classified as a human. He simply appeared as a naked torso with a head attached on top. No arms nor any legs, completely rid of hair. His torso was naked, not only without clothes, but not a navel or nipples to be seen. What the hell is that? Howard asked. Keep quiet, Zelensky shouted back. They are people, so show them some damn respect. Yeah, people. We both kept quiet while Zelensky whispered with the guards and was handed a patient chart. Alright kid, roll him into the examination room, he told me. I did as commanded, considering whether I should introduce myself to the creature sitting in the chair. But he had no ears to listen through or eyes to observe me with. His entire body seemed to be covered in third-degree burns that had healed horribly and unevenly. Doctor, what's going on with this guy? Is he even aware of his surroundings? I asked. I seriously doubt it, but I've seen weirder things, so just be polite. Should I introduce myself or something? Howard interjected as he was waving his arm in front of the man's face. No, in fact, you should wait outside. There's a high chance you'll end up in a similar chair if you don't leave right now, Zelensky said, visibly agitated by Howard's behavior. The creature twitched and moaned as Zelensky prodded him with various needles, taking blood and checking abdominal reflexes. The usual doctor stuff that I'm unqualified to judge. He hated every second of it, and as he screamed in agonized confusion, I saw that his tongue was nothing but a mere stump of flesh sitting in the middle of his mouth. He was helpless due to his disability, and despite his most valiant efforts of resistance, he was a short study. Zelensky, after years in the clinic, had become far too experienced to let any kind of crap distract him from getting the job done. Alright, I'm done, Howard. Would you take this guy to cell block B? We need him out of harm's way. Howard came running back into the room. Yes, sir, he responded, before rolling him away. Zelensky glanced back at the list that he had neatly placed on his desk. His mouth contorted into a subtle frown. He thought for a moment before explaining the situation to me. I have my suspicions about the next patient. I think that'll be difficult, so I need you to be ready, all right? I nodded in silence. And difficult people had been a large enough part of my previous occupations, so I wasn't all that worried. But the thought of dealing with another bizarre situation lingered in my mind. All right, Dr. Zelensky, this is patient number 987. An unknown guard said as he rolled in a rather muscular man in his early 40s. His body was limp, but he appeared to be breathing. Is he sedated or something? Zelensky asked. God knows, he's been like this for the past few months since we found him, and got ordered to move him here, so now he's your problem. Zelensky sighed. His muscles sure didn't atrophy. He's definitely going to be trouble. The man was massive. Not only did he look like Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime, but he was as tall as a redwood tree. Safe to say that I was terrified by his appearance alone, despite him being fast asleep. I held my hand close to my taser. At that point, I wished that I would have been given a real weapon. Zielinski carefully approached the new inmate and put a stethoscope to his chest. A very soft touch at first, and then with increasing confidence, he checked the patient out. As the patient examination progressed, I relaxed my previously trigger-happy hand, hoping it would be as peaceful as it was with the last person. I kept a watchful eye on Zielinski as he worked with the inmate. I even felt brave enough to pull my smartphone out of my pocket, just to check if somebody had messaged me on any social media, completely forgetting that no signal would make it to my phone. Yeah, that was a big mistake. Time has always escaped from me in a more than natural manner. That time it was only a couple of minutes, but those were all it took for the man to regain his consciousness and start attacking Dr. Zielinski. When I regained my sense of time, he was strangling my beloved supervisor. Help me. He forcefully pushed words through his throat as the man crushed him. I drew my taser with precision and pulled the trigger. It only had that one charge, and it had hit the man square in his forehead. He was noticeably distressed, but kept his hands firmly around Zielinski's throat. My only other option was to hit him with my baton. It was just enough to make him let go of the doctor and redirect his attention toward me. The attack was perfectly timed for Howard to return and assist us. He jumped on the new inmate's back and held his arm in a locked position. I assisted, and together we somehow managed to secure the prisoner to his chair. Howard quickly jammed a needle into his neck, sedating him in seconds. "Oh shit, Doc, are you alright?" Howard asked nervously. Zielinski lied on the floor, grabbing his throat while gasping for air. "Of course, I only had my trachea crushed just then." Having secured the prisoner, Zielinski told us to move him to a quarantine cell temporarily. We handed him off to a couple of guards working at the relevant cell block and returned to the doctor. Screw me, just bring in the last one," he said. The third patient appeared perfectly normal, if not a bit frail. He politely greeted Zielinski and introduced himself as Patrick Davies. "Alright, Mr. Davies, so I'm just gonna check your vitals and take a blood sample. Any problems that you care to mention?" Nothing at all, doctor. In fact, I can assure you that I'm quite healthy," Davies said. His accent was very peculiar. "Right, I'll just check your vitals and take some blood then." "As you wish, but I'm afraid my stay here will be rather short." "Short? According to this, you're supposed to be locked away for the next 30 years, Howard interrupted. Davies looked at Howard for a brief moment and smiled. "Oh, that's a nice watch you have there, Mr. Banks. Would you mind parting with it?" His watch was neatly hidden under his sweater. There's no way that Davies could have seen it, and Howard was visibly shocked. He hadn't even introduced himself, yet Davies knew his name. Howard kept quiet. "Well, once you'll see fit, you can drop by my cell and drop it off. No need to look tough in front of your colleagues." At that point, Zielinski jumped in to continue the examination. Both me and Howard exchanged concerned looks with each other. "You're a good doctor," Davies said. "Oh, it's a shame about your wife. She was such a beaut—" "You shut your mouth," Zielinski yelled. The room fell silent. Zielinski took a few breaths before composing himself. "He's fine. Take him to cell block C and let the guards find a suitable new abode for him." "Oh, Dr. Zielinski, I meant no offense. Clearly it wasn't your fault. You only meant to." "Shut your mouth or I'll shut it for you." Howard and I rushed out of there with Davies, a peculiar man with a strange ability. Despite everything, he seemed more normal than the rest. "What was that about Zielinski's wife?" Howard dared to ask. "I don't believe that's any of your concern," Davies responded. "Right. Tell you what, you hand me the watch and I'll tell you a prediction." Howard hesitated. "Oh, it's not like it's worth more than a few American dollars." Half out of what I assumed to be a morbid sense of curiosity and half out of fear, Howard handed over his watch. "Thank you, Mr. Banks." "So what's the prediction?" "Tomorrow is Thursday. On this particular day, as I'm sure you're well aware, cell block D does not belong to you." "How the hell do you know about that?" Howard shot back. As confused as I was speechless, I intently listened to the next part of the conversation. The owners are quite fond of me, and I would kindly ask you both to stay out of the way. There won't be any need for violence. So they're going to break you out? I asked. Oh no, not at all. They're going to bring me over to their realm. Before I could ask anything else, a guard grabbed Davy's arm and ordered us to not talk to him. He quickly guided Davies away to cell block C and waved his arm to make us leave. Just remember, gentlemen, stay away from block D tomorrow and it will all be fine. But the fine Dr. Zielinski is on borrowed time. Davies yelled from his cell as we walked away. As we got ready to leave for the day, neither of us said a word. Davies appeared as a normal man, but after all I had seen, he somehow had a keen ability to evoke fear from somewhere deep and dark in my soul. Something definitely feels very wrong about tomorrow. I didn't post yesterday and I'm sorry. I promised to update each day, but I've been trapped in the prison overnight. I tried whatever I could to think of to contact the outside world, but on top of the horrible phone service in the prison, something kept removing my messages. Zielinski is currently missing, and not a single person seems to even know that he existed. If anyone has answers, it would be Davies, but he has vanished as well. There's a lot for me to digest, but I'll do my best to explain what the hell has happened over the time that we've missed. As I arrived at the prison on Thursday morning, I wasn't greeted by the dormant guard as usual. Herbert had left his book on the chair and was inexplicably missing from his post. The eerie feeling from Davis's words from the day before had built up in my chest again. A bout of anxiety slowly demanded my attention. I rushed to the infirmary in hopes of finding any of my coworkers. Just as I arrived, I got a glimpse of Herbert slapping the living hell out of Zielinski. "Wake up, damn it," he yelled as he gave Zielinski another red cheek. Just seeing the mountain that is Herbert slapping somebody half his size was horrifying to say the least, and I honestly wasn't sure whether to let him keep at it or to interfere. Zielinski was just standing in the middle of the infirmary with an empty stare, looking frailer than any of his patients. "What's happening?" I asked. That stubborn idiot just had to stay beyond his shift yesterday, and now he's frozen like this. Herbert saw the terror on my face. Don't worry, rookie. It's not the first time this has happened to our good doctor." He gave him another forceful slap, and suddenly Zielinski came back to himself with a violent gasp before collapsing to the ground. "Shit, somebody probably should have caught him," Herbert said. They brought Zielinski to what appeared to be a small guest room smack in the middle of the prison. It was worn out and so thickly covered in dust that I couldn't believe anyone had ever lived there. But Herbert said Zielinski would rather die than to wake up in the infirmary like one of those godforsaken inmates. My job, as always, was to watch over him. Seemingly a pointless task at that point, but I obediently followed orders, patiently waiting for him to regain consciousness. It took 3 hours for Zielinski to wake up again. No sooner had he seen me before he started rambling incoherently in a bizarre language that I had never heard. "Davies, I need to talk to Davies," he finally said. He stumbled a bit as he got to his feet, but as his usual self, he refused to let me help him. We rushed to cell block C, where we had dumped Davies the day before. "I need to speak to prisoner number 1597, Patrick Davies," Zielinski demanded from the assigned guard. The guard gave Zielinski a dull look. "Sir, you need the proper documentation to make that request," he simply responded. "Listen to me, you numbskulled prick. I am one of the few senior staff members that remain here," Zielinski said as he handed over his identification. The guard apologized and led us to a service station. He typed in the given information into the computer. As he did, a progressively more confused look appeared on his face. "Doctor, there's no record of any Patrick Davies." Zielinski just sighed. "Well, take me to cell number 233 then." The guard complied, taking us into the cell block. The one Zielinski had requested was bricked up, clearly closed for a long time. though we both remember Davies being put there yesterday. What happened here? Beats me, it's been like this since I started over a year ago, the guard said. At that point, Zielinski had clearly given up on getting any useful information from the guard. Agitated and defeated, he stormed off to his office at the infirmary. I followed a few steps behind him to avoid becoming the focus of his frustration. Once at the office, he rummaged through the bottom drawer, pulling out a half-empty bottle of whiskey. This is just one of these days. Sit down, he ordered me. Doctor, do you really think this is the best idea? I asked. You've seen the shit that goes on around here. This is the only right idea there is. He filled 2 glasses and chugged his down in one large gulp, before generously giving himself another glass. So tell me, why are you still here? He asked. It was a simple enough question, but I couldn't find any reasonable explanation. I had nothing in life worth staying for. No family to speak of, no close friends, nor a girlfriend. Life was shit and the job was all that remained. I don't have anywhere else to go, I simply said. Well, that's as good a reason as any, he responded as he held up his glass. Cheers. We sat there, slowly finishing the bottle. My part in drinking was minuscule compared to Zielinski's, who appeared to be a veteran alcoholic. After what seemed like an eternity, Zielinski finally broke the awkward silence. You know, my wife was always better at this. She worked here too? No, but she was a doctor and a great one at that. Loved her patients and did whatever she could to help them. Much better than me. Why she even put up with my shit, I'll never know. What happened to her? She got sick. That's always what happens. The shit ones always prevail, get a chance to live another day, while the best ones perish for no good reason. He took another large sip of his drink. And I tried to save her too, lost my damn medical license in the progress. That's how I ended up here, the only place that would hire someone like myself. I'm sorry, was all that I could think to say. Yeah, well, good thing I ended up here though. It was the only way that I could rescue her. So your wife is still alive? Of course she is, what do you take me for? But she's not exactly among. Zielinski was interrupted by the light starting to flicker above us, followed by a metallic clunk. It was only for a brief second, but once the light settled back, I could see the immediate change in Zielinski's composure. He was scared. For my brief tenure at the prison, I had seen Zielinski display a wide array of angry emotions, but never fear. Shivers shot down my spine. Zielinski glanced at the clock on the wall and I turned to check it too. 8:55 p.m. It was another lapse in time, the biggest one that I had experienced yet. Dr. Zielinski, we need to check the exit. This isn't how it's supposed to happen, he said as he drunkenly stumbled up from his chair and started jogging towards the door. To my surprise, Herbert was still sitting in his chair facing away from us. Herbert, Zielinski shouted as we got closer. He didn't respond. I went over and I tapped him carefully on his shoulder before turning his chair around. I stumbled back in shock as I realized his entire face was now missing. Not torn off or even wounded in any feasible way. His entire head was covered in smooth skin, untouched and unharmed. Herbert had died, sitting in his chair with his beloved book. Zielinski pulled me away, telling me not to touch him before checking the exit. Darkness, but not due to a lack of light, but because of a viscous fog occupying everything that existed beyond the door. Darker than the coldest night, Vanta black. What the hell is happening? We're trapped. The two of us stood frozen before the darkness, neither of us able to come up with any reasonable idea about what to do next. We wouldn't have to wait long to be jolted out of our shock. Something pulled us back with an intense sense of panic and hopelessness. A simple but horrifying sound emerging from the depths of cell block D. the sound of someone humming. It wasn't an ominous kind of humming, as innocent as someone just going about their day with a song stuck in their head. "And we better board ourselves up in the office," Zelinsky said, regaining a hint of confidence in his words. On the way, we kept our eyes open for any sight of the night staff. Howard should have been on shift, but was nowhere to be seen. The dark, viscous fog that had consumed the outside world also separated us from the other cell blocks. All we had left in our little horrific world was the infirmary and cell block D. According to protocol, we never enter cell block D on Thursdays. "What do we do now?" I asked as we arrived at the office. "I don't know, we just wait, I suppose." "And Herbert?" "He's dead. If that's even him sitting in that chair, you never know in this place." Without alternative options, we simply waited. Neither of us speaking a word for what seemed like hours, just sitting and listening to the ominous humming. The windows displayed nothing but the emptiness outside, everlasting darkness stretching on and on. We were trapped in a prison, not as inmates but merely as unlucky employees. The lights flickered again, a few minutes of blinking lights before a large shatter echoed through the hallways, followed by darkness. The power had gone out. "What the hell? The backup generator should have started by now," Zelinsky said after a couple of minutes. He fumbled his way through the darkness and pulled out a couple of flashlights from a cupboard. It was enough to keep the room dimly lit, all save for the windows. The black fog had started seeping through the window as the lights went out. While the flashlights stopped the spread of darkness, it wasn't enough to penetrate the fog. "Hey, check the hallways, would ya?" Zelinsky demanded. Just like with the windows, the fog that separated us from the rest of the prison had started spreading down the hallway toward us. With only a couple of flashlights, it wouldn't be long before it consumed us. Forget it. I'm gonna go turn the generator on myself," he said. I thought back to the first day. I had seen the generator room, but the only way to get there would be through cell block D, which was strictly off limits on Thursdays. "But doctor," I started. "I know the risks. That's why you're staying here. Keep that damn light pointed at the shadows, it'll slow them down." Zelinsky rushed towards the godforsaken cell block, and I sat diligently behind and counted each second, waiting for him to return. The darkness kept creeping up upon me, barely halting in front of my light. For each moment that passed, the prison shrank, enveloping in a blinding void of nothingness. In the distance, I could hear the sounds of heavy footsteps echoing through the prison. As far as I could tell, they were coming from cell block D, and I initially thought that they belonged to Zelinsky. But they kept multiplying, first 1 and then 2 and then 4. And shortly it became an indescribable mess of heavy feet running around. I waited and waited longer than I should have, frozen in a mixture of confusion and fear. It wasn't until I noticed that all the clocks had stopped that I noticed that time itself wasn't actually moving. For all I know, I could have suffered another time lapse, and Zelinsky could have died hours ago. The darkness had gotten so close that it could almost touch me, and with just a second to spare, I jumped out into the hallway as the void swallowed the office. My flashlight didn't even phase it anymore. It rapidly digested everything in its path, leaving me with no choice but to venture into cell block D. The lights flickered on for a moment, a loud electrical buzz sounding throughout the hallways before every single bulb in the building shattered into a million pieces and rained down on top of me. The humming had stopped momentarily, but quickly returned even louder than before. Zelinsky had turned on the generator and it broke the lights, but even more now, he was in danger. With a sudden and unknown surge of bravery, I rushed towards the cell block, hoping that I could do anything at all to help Zelinsky, even though I fully expected us both to die horrible deaths. I ran, the cell block never appearing around the corner that it should. Twists and turns in the hallway that never existed before hindered my progress, throwing me into an endless loop. All the while, the humming got louder and I could distinguish 2 different sources. one darker than the other and possibly vibrating through the air, and the other familiar, yet I couldn't quite place it. Just on the brink of collapse, out of breath and presumably out of time, I arrived at the cell block. To my surprise, the man humming was Patrick Davies himself, the inmate that inexplicably escaped and suddenly stopped existing in any official records. Around him were dozens of tall, shadow creatures walking around the hall with large chains attached to their ankles. In front of Davies, a fracture emitting intense light hung in the middle of the air. Davies was staring down at his wristwatch, the one that he had gotten from Howard, and it seemed that he was timing his hums to the clock. For each hum, another returned from the fracture portal in front of him. Zielinski was standing there too. "Dr. Zielinski," I yelled. Both of them looked over at me, a wide smile appearing on Davies' face. "Oh, I'm sorry, but the doctor is coming with me," he said. I walked over, but the shadow creatures moved to block the way. "Zielinski, what are you doing?" I asked. "Stay back, kid. This is something that has to happen," Zielinski responded. "What are you talking about?" "He said that if I help him, he would bring me to my wife," Zielinski said. "Don't do it," I begged. "I don't have anything else to stay for." I took a step closer, and one of the shadows kneeled down before me and opened its mouth impossibly wide, black fog pouring out from it. Davies signaled for the creature to stop. "They won't hurt you if you stay back," Davies said. "Unfortunately, you'll have to stay behind. But I see now Zielinski was right about you." "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "That you will be important for the future," Davies said. "You're just going to have to be patient," he added. He turned to Zielinski and nodded. "It's time to go, doctor." Zielinski gave me one last glance before they both stepped into the fracture, both vanishing before my eyes as they did. That's all I remember before waking up on the floor to Howard pouring a bucket of ice-cold water on me. "Hey kid, what the hell happened to you?" I must have babbled incoherently because Howard didn't seem to understand a single thing that poured out of me. "Zielinski," I managed to stutter. "What in the hell is a Zielinski?" Howard asked. They later told me that Herbert had suffered a massive heart attack, which medically made sense considering his size. Other than that, he appeared perfectly normal. No trace of the mess that me and Zielinski had faced the night before. No record exists of Benjamin Zielinski or Patrick Davies. Both have been erased from existence. Davies' last words to me described me as an important part of the puzzle, but I'm not sure how long I'll have to wait before finding out what the hell that even means. I want to investigate Zielinski's disappearance, but I wouldn't even know where to start. His office held no evidence either. I've gone back further than square one, but I'm promising to myself that I'm not going to give up before I find him again. At least I hope he found his wife, but I don't trust Davies to keep his word for a second. As Davies said, I'll have to be